Okay, Chairman, we are now live.
Good afternoon and welcome to the meeting of the Northern Planning Committee. I am Councillor Paul Wynne, Chair of this committee. The meeting is being live streamed so members of the public can hear the audio of the meeting and view the papers shown on the screen. If any of the committee members experience technical difficulties during the meeting, please contact IT on the number you already have. Please mute your microphones unless asked to speak and then remute after speaking. Use the chat function to indicate you want to speak, but nothing else, because the debate has to be heard by those listening to the audio feed. Members should ensure that they are present through the meeting, as you cannot vote on any item if you've not heard all the debate. As Chair, I will interpret the Council's existing standing orders in light of the requirement of remote participation, with advice from the Monitoring Officer prior to making a ruling. At the start of the meeting, I will ask members of the committee to confirm their presence and any disclosable pecuniary interests. Can members and officers introduce themselves each time before they speak, so those listening know who is speaking? Members must, roll call and disclosable pecuniary interest. Members must disclose any pecuniary interest in any matter to be discussed which is not included in the register of interest, and leave the meeting by turning off their camera, muting their microphones prior to the matter being discussed. Okay, we'll do the roll call now. Councillor Roy Allcroft.
Yes, Chair, present and no pecuniary interest. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Nick Bardsley.
Present and no pecuniary interest.
Councillor Gerald Dakin. Okay, there was a bit of a hiccup, so maybe he's getting trouble coming in. We'll come back to him if he comes online. Councillor Pauline D. I think she's given apologies, so we'll skip that one. Councillor Nat Green.
Present, no pecuniary interest.
Councillor Vince Hunt.
Present and no pecuniary interest.
Councillor Mark Jones.
Present. I have a bias on the item 8, so I'll probably leave the meeting for item 8.
Thank you, Mark. Councillor Pamela Mosley.
Present, no pecuniary interest.
Thank you. Councillor Keith Roberts.
Present, no pecuniary interest.
David Vesmere.
Present, no.
Thank you. And myself, I have no interest either. Okay. Please can the officers now confirm their presence? Planning officers.
Philip Molyneux, Principal Planner.
Kelvin Hall, Principal Planner.
Miranda Garrard, Solicitor.
Thank you, Miranda. Committee Officer.
Shelley Davis, Committee Officer.
Thank you, Shirley. I shall now turn to the items on the agenda. Item 1, apologies.
Councillor Pauline D has given her apologies for absence, and Councillor Julian Dean is substituting.
Thank you very much. Julian, do you have any interests?
No, I'm present and I have no interests to declare. Thanks.
Item 2, to confirm the minutes of the Northern Planning Committee meeting held on the 12th of January 2020. I move that the minutes of the previous Northern Planning Committee meeting held on the 12th of January 2021 are circulated be signed as the correct record. Can I have a seconder, please?
I'll second. Councillor Allcroft. Seconded.
Thank you. Whoops. I will now accept these minutes as a true record unless anyone else indicates differently. I'll give you a couple of seconds. Okay, move on to item 3 then. Do we have any public questions? Shelley, do we have any public questions? Sorry.
Shelley, Committee Officer. No, none received.
Right, item 4, disclosure of pecuniary interest. This has been dealt with during the initial roll call of the meeting. Turning to the substantive items, the planning officer will present the items, then we will deal with public speaking part of the meeting, then open it to members of the committee to debate. We'll turn to item 5 now, the proposed dwelling to the west of 14 Ellesmere Road, Tetchell, Shropshire. Can the planning officer introduce themselves and present this item, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Philip Molyneux, Principal Planner, presenting this item. Right, members will recall this application as it was considered at last month's committee meeting, at which members resolved to grant planning permission in accordance with the officer recommendation and to delegate to the planning services manager to amend conditions 3 and 4 in relation to the comments as noted by the highways manager during the meeting with regards to visibility displays and the inclusion of a footpath as set out in the previous consent for development to the rear of the site, and an additional condition in relation to boundary treatment. As indicated in the report, the application is represented to committee as it is considered necessary to update members on the advice given during the last meeting with regards to the footpath along the site's road frontage in respect of the 2007 Reserve Matters approval, which is correct in relation to the relevant plan, which is incorrect, sorry, in relation to the relevant planning history and development to the rear of the site. These 3 dwellings that have been recently constructed on site and the relevant planning approval as set out in the report did not have a condition requesting a footpath along the site's front elevation. And that obviously adjoins the site subject to this application. Further still, as set out in the report, it is considered unreasonable to expect the applicants to install a footpath alongside the roadside elevation, as any footpath installation would not join up with any footpath either side of the site. The recommendation on this application remains one of approval, subject to conditions as set out in Appendix 1 attached to the report, which includes provision for the amendments as approved at the last committee, minus the footpath, of course. For members' benefit, I will now rerun briefly through the application. Application proposes erection of 1 dwelling and realignment of private access drive and all associated works on land to the west of Ellesmere Road in Tetchell. There are no further updates on this application. Can run through the slides now, please. The application site outlined in red. Note the area in relation to the surrounding built environment, with this site located within the built-up form of the settlement concerned and within the recognised development boundary. Next slide, please. That shows it in relation to the wider context of the village. Next slide, please. The floor plans of the proposed dwelling, which is a small cottage style dwelling with 3 rooms on the first floor, which could obviously be used as bed. Next slide, please. Elevation plan. As you can see, a modest cottage style dwelling. Next slide, please. This shows the dwelling in relation to the dwellings either side of it. There's a terrace to the one side, which has taken where the architect appears to have taken the lead from in designing his cottage, and to the other side is a detached dwelling. Next slide, please. Right, these are photographs of the site. This is one of the ones that was presented at committee last month. Next slide. This is another one that was at committee last month, and the final slide, please. This is one I've taken recently, showing the site where the road is now, is where the proposed dwelling is to be built on, and the access road to the rear of the site, to the side, to the right-hand side of the barrier on the road there. Council has acknowledged that the local parish council objected to the proposed development for reasons as outlined in section 4 of the report, along with the local member and a number of members of the public. There were no objections from any of the statutory consultees, including Shropshire Council Highways. In conclusion, on balance, with consideration to the amended plans received, which indicated a small 2-storey, 3-bedroom cottage-style dwelling that officers consider will blend in with the surrounding street scene, the plot representing an infill plot with a dwelling of suitable scale and mass in relation to the surrounding built environment, the recommendation remains one of approval subject to the conditions as outlined in Appendix 1 attached to the report. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That concludes my presentation on this application.
Thank you, Philip. Any public speakers on this matter have submitted written statements to be read out in accordance with revised procedure for public speaking. The local member may read out their own or may have elected for the solicitor to also read theirs. Can the solicitor read out any statements, please?
There have been none submitted on this one, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Does the planning officer wish to clarify anything? I presume not.
No.
Right. I will now open. I will now open the debate for the committee to comment. Please indicate on the chat function if you wish to speak. The solicitor will let me know who is next to speak. Thank you.
Miranda Garrod, Councillor Hunt is indicated, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Hunt.
Thank you. I left that to the last minute to see if anybody else. Obviously, we went through and debated this very thoroughly at the last meeting. I think the only thing that has changed on it is the fact that we're no longer requiring them to put in a footpath, as there are no other footpaths in this part of the village. I did allude to it last week because I couldn't see, or last meeting, as I couldn't see any footpaths in the pictures that we saw. It would in effect just become a footpath to nowhere. So I'm quite happy to, given that we've chewed this over before, we're just removing, as I say, the need for a footpath which wouldn't connect to anything. I'm quite happy to move the officer's recommendations, Chair.
Thank you, Vince. Do I have any comments or a seconder?
Councillor Aldcroft, I'll second that. I don't think there's any need to add to what Councillor Hunt already said.
Thank you, Roy. Are there any points that the planning officer, the solicitors wish to clarify?
No, thank you, Chair.
Okay.
No, thank you.
So we have, right, if we have no more speakers, please can we propose, and second, we've done that. We will now take a vote. The solicitor will read out the names of the committee members present entitled to vote and then confirm the result of the vote.
Thank you, Chair. There aren't any other speakers indicating now, so we'll go ahead with that. I'll read the names out and please indicate for or against. Councillor Aldcroft.
For.
Councillor Bardsley.
For.
Councillor Dakin, I don't believe has joined yet. He'll tell me if not. No. Councillor Green.
For.
Councillor Dean.
I'm not going to vote because my internet connection went down, so I missed some of the discussion, I'm afraid.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, I'm just going to do
That's fine.
up today. Oh, okay.
Councillor Hunt.
Okay, don't they? Yeah, good.
For somebody needs to mute, Shelley.
In planning committee, just listening. Just got planning committee on, just listening.
Sorry, who's that speaking? For.
Chair, I believe it was the assistant director who's listening in. Apologies for that. I've muted that microphone. Let me just say Councillor Hunt now, please.
Still for.
Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Hunt. Councillor Jones.
It's 4, please.
Thank you. Councillor Mosley.
4, thank you.
Councillor Roberts.
4.
Councillor Vasma.
4.
Councillor Wynne.
4.
Thank you, Chair. That's unanimous.
Thank you. So confirmed it's on the officer's recommendation. Okay, so now we'll move on to item 6. Links Holiday Lodges, the Links Hinstock Market, Drayton, Shropshire. Can the planning officer present this item, please?
Thank you, Chair. Kelvin Hall, Principal Planner. This is an application for a change of use of land to form holiday caravan park to include the siting of 10 static caravans with layout, modified road access, amenity land, play area and office buildings at the Links in Hinstock. Before I start, I would draw your attention to the additional letters schedule which was circulated to you yesterday. This provides an alteration to recommended condition 5 so that it now pulls through the reason for the condition. Paragraph 6.6.1 of the committee report refers to the need for a condition requiring details of surface and foul drainage to be submitted for approval, and the recommended wording for this is now included in the additional letters. In addition, if members are minded to grant permission, it is recommended that this is subject to an additional condition to specify the number of caravans and that this shall not exceed 10 and that the layout shall adhere to the submitted plan. Also, a late representation was received yesterday which queries some of the distances referred to in the committee report. These have been checked and we would confirm that the distances to the nearest properties are correct and that the case officer has visited the site on a number of occasions. The representation also requests that members undertake a site visit and refers to drainage issues. However, these have already been included in the committee report and assessed. Can we have the first slide, please? So the site lies to the east of Hinstock village, and you can see the location of residential properties in the area, the closest of which are at the Yelves to the east. I would point out that the southeastern part of the site benefits from planning permission for the siting of 5 log cabins, which was granted in 2012. Only 2 of these have been sited, and you can see the position of these 2 on this plan on the eastern side. Next slide. This is another location plan. You can see the existing site access at the southeast edge of the site. Next slide. This shows the proposed layout of the site, showing the 10 static caravans on the left-hand side of the plan is the details of the small site office, which will be sited near the entrance to the site. Next slide. This is a more detailed site layout. There'll be 2 parking spaces per caravan as shown, a play area highlighted in yellow and a communal amenity area, and there would also be, as you can see, significant landscaping planting in and around the site. Next slide. So this shows the location of the site in relation to the village of Hinstock and the access roads in the area between the site and Hinstock village. Next slide. And this is an aerial photo which shows the surrounding uses, which you can see are predominantly rural and agricultural in nature, with the Yelves residential area to the east. Next slide. So this is a site photo of the existing site. It shows it looking from the site entrance. Openings will be formed in the hedgerow on the left hand side to gain access to the rest of the site, which will be beyond that hedgerow. Next slide. And this shows the existing vehicle access into the site, and it is proposed that this would be improved in terms of improving the visibility displays. Next slide. This one shows the layout of the approved site, which is for 5 log cabins. You can see how they are arranged within the site at the southeastern corner of the field. And next slide. And as referred to in the report, and I'll touch upon later on, the current application follows on for an application which was refused. This was the layout of the site for that refused scheme, and the one that was dismissed at appeal. You can see the general arrangement and positioning of the 10 static caravans in the office within the centre of the site. Can we go back to slide, I think it's 19, please? Yeah, thank you. So yeah, the background to the proposal is outlined in the committee report at 6.1.1. As mentioned, there is a stamp permission for 5 log cabins, only 2 of which have been provided to date. Planning permission for a similar development of 10 static caravans was refused under delegated powers, with a single refusal reason that it would result in a cramped and overdeveloped appearance. The subsequent appeal was dismissed, and the principal concerns of the inspector were to do with the impact on the open and rural nature of the area due to the relatively intense cluster of static caravans. In contrast, he advised that the approved layout of the log cabins would have them widely spaced and enable clear visual gaps through the site, largely retaining its rural character. So the current proposal would provide the same number of caravans as the refused scheme, but over a significantly larger area of land. As noted in the report, whereas the refused scheme would have a density of 12 units per acre, the revised scheme reduces this to 6 units per acre. The council's landscape consultant has visited the site, and the findings are in 6.3.7 that there would be a slight negative effect on the landscape initially, but this would reduce to positive following the establishment of the landscape planting. He also advises that visual impacts will be slight negative at worst, and these would reduce to negligible following 15 years of landscaping growth. Officers are of the view that the current layout satisfactorily addresses the previous reason for refusal and the concerns of the appeal inspector. The proposal would have a positive effect on the local rural economy, and this was also the view of the appeal inspector. It's supported under tourism policies of the development plan, as outlined in section 6.2 of the report, as it is close to Hinstock village and there is a tourism site already permitted at the site. There were no objections from the council's highways officer regarding site access or traffic generation, or from the council's drainage team regarding drainage or flood risk. And finally, a planning condition can be imposed to require that the caravans are not for permanent accommodation. Officers are of the view that this constitutes an appropriate expansion of the permitted tourism facility and recommend that planning permission is granted. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Kelvin. Can the system read out any public speaking statements, please?
Thank you, Chair. Miranda Garrod speaking. There are some public speaking statements. The first of these is from Rose Carter on behalf of local residents, and she's speaking against. She says, planning permission given in 2011 to 2012 for 5 log cabins. The houses on the Yelves were not informed of this application. 2 log cabins built and permission for touring caravans. At this time, there was 6.5 acres of land. The site was never used for touring, evidence of this already sent to you. 2 log cabins occasionally used for 2 seasons, but not viable. Last 2 years used by the previous owner and his family for their only residence, already reported to you. Sold to D&D Gulligan for 50,000 as stated on HM Land Registry, but now only 1.8 acres, title number SL 66440. Originally applied for 11 caravans and then dropped to 10, saying less than that wasn't a viable business. Turned down as 10 caravans by the Secretary of State on the 1st of May 2020. Both the Highways and MO Defence have made comments to say if this was to be passed, they could only be holiday lets for 3 weeks at a time. However, Dan Culligan personally told me that the caravans would be sold and he would then charge the ground rent. so they could be used for months upon a time. If this is the case, who will be monitoring this? It is well documented that the road leading to the proposed site is a dangerous, narrow, one-car road with no footpath. Adding more traffic to this road is an accident waiting to happen. The road in front of the site floods and the drains block up, leaving a flow of water running down the road. You only need to read all the comments from residents to the objections as to the issues we see. My final comment on this: if this application is passed, the residents would want a full brief as to why, but also it would open the floodgates to a number of previous planning submissions that have been refused on the grounds of the dangerous road, etc. You would surely not be able to refuse based on passing 10 or 11 caravans. Chair, the next statement is from Hinstock Parish Council, and they are speaking against the application. They state, "We refer to your letter dated 2nd February 2021 regarding the above matter and comment accordingly. 1. This application is substantively the same as the previous application, reference 19-03-205 full, related to this site. This was refused by Shropshire Council, and further, on appeal, that decision was upheld by the Planning Inspectorate on 1st of May 2020. We find it absolutely bizarre that this matter is again under consideration, with an officer's recommendation that it should be granted. We question whether, given the above facts, is this Shropshire Council's normal procedure for dealing with applications related to previously rejected proposals, particularly where the Planning Inspectorate has comprehensively agreed with the decision. 2. Notwithstanding comments 2 to 5, we note that our previous comments related to this site are included in your meeting notes and confirm that these remain fully relevant and applicable in relation to this current application and should be considered fully. 3. We remain firmly of the opinion that this location is entirely unsuitable for the proposed development. The impact on this locality, its residents and its amenity will be entirely out of proportion to any perceived benefit from tourism. There would also inevitably be an increase in noise and light pollution in this area. 4. It should be noted that there is overwhelming strength of local opinion that this development would have an overwhelmingly disproportionate effect on this peaceful, rural location and its amenity. We are fully aware of all the comments and the petition that has been raised by our parishioners regarding this application and wish to note that we fully concur with and support their objections. 5. This development would lead to an unacceptable increase in traffic movements on the basis that amenity and tourist areas can only be reached by private transport from Hinstock. There are no public transport services, therefore significantly more car movements would be inevitable on this narrow network of rural lanes. In conclusion, we are of the opinion that this development is completely unsuitable for this location. Its effect on this area would be immeasurable. Therefore, we object to this application in the strongest terms, and that's signed Kevin Sutherland, the Chair of Hinstock Parish Council. Chair, the next statement is from the local member, Councillor Rob Gittins, and I understand that he's attending the meeting to read out his own statement.
Thank you,
Thank
Miran.
you. Oh.
Councillor Gittins, are you there?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Councillor Rob Gittins, member for Hinstock. Firstly, a very good afternoon to members and officers. I would like members to fully understand the history surrounding this application, as this is not the first application on this site, as you've already heard. Around 18 months ago, almost an identical application was submitted and officers refused this as being too large in size and scale. The applicant then went to appeal and the Planning Inspectorate came to the same conclusions as council officers. I have to say myself and residents are rather bemused that officers have performed such an unfantastic U-word turn on an application which is pretty much exactly the same as previous applications that was refused. This application is still for 10 static caravans and is still far too large in size and scale. I would also like members to consider the economic viability of this application, as for many years now there have been 2 lodges on this site with a previous application for 5, but only 2 have ever been built. These 2 lodges have very rarely been rented out due to a lack of demand. So I have to ask, why on earth do officers now feel that replacing 2 lodges with 10 static caravans are going to suddenly generate the demand that isn't even there in the first place? I would also like to note that although I understand why highways officers may have come to their conclusions in their report, they are missing some very critical pieces of local knowledge that in this case would far outweigh that of the highways report. So I would like to draw members' attention back to the map in the presentation, where you'll see a housing estate to the east known as the Yelves. Here there are a number of parents living on this estate with young children who walk every day to the local primary school in Hinstock. I would like to reference a particular parent with her 5 children who has on more than one occasion, I believe, has had to throw her children into the hedge to avoid them being hit by fast moving traffic. This road is an incredibly unsafe road for pedestrians, and to be quite frank, it's not good enough for planning officers simply to fob this off onto highways. As we know, highways are running off a very limited budget. They struggle even to fill the potholes in a good time. Never mind put in a very expensive and much needed highway safety scheme to keep residents safe. This application could potentially add around 30 to 40 extra traffic movements per day to a road that is already incredibly unsafe. And I would ask committee members to think about this very carefully when deciding how they're going to vote. Finally, as members can see, this is an extremely divisive application with over 30 objections and a petition with around 45 names. This covers literally every single property in the immediate area. Nobody wants this. This is completely against community aspirations. Please could I ask members not to force something onto the local community that is so utterly divisive. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gittings. Do the planning officers wish to clarify any points in response? Sorry, Miranda.
Chair, there's one more statement because it's now the applicant, there's the agent on behalf of the applicant that follows next.
I apologise for that.
Thank you, Chair. So the next statement is from Mr. Jason Kennedy, the agent on behalf of the applicant, and he writes, "Dear councillors, the application before you today is for your consideration, not a previous application, appeal, or the history of the site, which have already been decided. The applicants, Mr. D and D Gulligan, are Irish businessmen who own and operate a number of holiday caravan sites throughout the country. Regardless of nationality, this has resulted in needless whipping up of local concern. The application before you is for an additional 5 holiday units over the 5 units already approved. This application is for a total of 10 units with access, layout and landscaping, etc. The approval of this application, as recommended by your officers, has been informed through a thorough and detailed consultation process with fully qualified and highly experienced public officials to whom their judgment, experience, expertise and decisions you rely on in the decision-making process for all planning applications. During the application, no highway concerns, safety or otherwise, has been expressed by the professionals. Objections received by residents on these matters are not borne out with any evidence. Indeed, this application is for a small holiday caravan site for 10 units. The movement of traffic is negligible and will mostly take place at weekends. The site for 10 caravans will not increase traffic movements by up to 40 additional movements a day. During the application, No public amenity, noise or light pollution or any other disturbance to local residents or their quiet enjoyment has been expressed by the professionals. Objections received by residents on these matters are not borne out with any material evidence. During the application, no landscape, rural character, ecology, trees, flooding or drainage concerns or any adverse impact has been expressed by the professionals. Objections received by residents on these matters are not borne out with any material evidence. The proposed site has an established use for tourist accommodation, and the planning policy principle for providing static holiday caravans is acceptable. It is considered that this application will minimise any visual impact on the rural character and surrounding countryside. The proposed access will improve visibility for emerging vehicles, and there is no significant highway impact on highway safety. The static caravans will not result in any detrimental impact on neighbouring properties, and visitors will provide economic benefit to the local area. This application amounts to sustainable development, and it is therefore kindly requested that you approve the application in line with your officer's recommendation. Thank you. And Chair, that is the final public statement on this matter.
Thank you, Miranda. Do the planning officers wish to clarify any points in response?
Kelvin Hall, no thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Members of the committee can now comment, please. Solicitors will indicate who's to speak next. So we open it up to the floor now.
I haven't got any. First indication, Chair, Councillor Bardsley.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bardsley.
Apologies, Chairman, and apologies for the typo. It's a question. It seems to me that the requirement that these are for holiday lets only is going to be difficult to monitor, let alone enforce. Could the planning officers explain in detail how this is going to be done and at what intervals, and who is going to be involved in this monitoring exercise? Because it's extremely difficult in very well established regulated sites to prevent static caravans particularly turning into permanent accommodation. And I would be very interested to know how the planning officers intend to monitor and enforce the requirement that these are holiday lets.
Thank you. Right. Kelvin, could you go straight back to you and have a response from you, please?
Thank you, Chair. Kelvin Hall. Yeah, obviously the application is for a change of use for holiday accommodation, in order to ensure that that is adhered to. Officers recommend that there is a condition, which is at number 12 in the end of the report, that states that it's only to be used for holiday accommodation, and it shall not be occupied as a person's sole or main place of residence. And also, though, that the site operator shall maintain an up-to-date register of the names of all owners and occupiers of the holiday lodges and of their main home addresses, and shall make that information available at all reasonable times to the local planning authority. This is a standard wording which we use on these types of sites. You may recall that it was the wording that was used on the Hencote site that came to committee last time, and it gives the planning authority an element of control that if there are concerns that the caravans aren't being used for holiday accommodation, then we can request and require that information to be provided to us so that we can investigate further. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Is that okay, Councillor Bardsley?
Well, I didn't quite answer my question, Chairman. Yeah, I picked up the register and so on. How frequently do the officers think they will be visiting the site?
I don't think they'll be visiting sites unless something's flagged up, to be honest. But let Kelvin come back.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think, yes, realistically, it will be a situation where if we receive concerns that the site isn't being operated as it should be, with this particular issue and with any other issue, then, you know, clearly we will investigate under our normal enforcement procedures. But the likelihood of officers routinely monitoring the site, unless we hear of any particular concerns, is small.
Thank you. Yeah. Right. Next one.
Councillor Hunt, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hunt.
Thank you, Councillor Hunt here. I mean, on the face of it, this seems to be relatively straightforward. But actually, when you think about some of the bits in the report, I'm not so sure that it is, to be perfectly honest with you. 6.3.5 and 6.3.7, and as indeed the officer did during his presentation, highlight the landscaping appraisals, where they talk about, and it is subjective in my opinion, a visual impact. They are saying that it's small. I'm sure for the people who live in that area, it isn't so small. My concern is the 15 years that they're talking about, where that will gradually decrease over that period. That seems like an awful long time to me for the people living in those homes. Indeed, that lady with 5 children, they will probably all have left home and be at university by the time this doesn't stand out. I've also got a concern with regard to the highways report. Now, I know that highways have indicated, and indeed the agent has suggested, that there aren't any issues, but in 6.5.3 it does say, however, having regard to the current application, whilst acknowledging the highway deficiencies of the local highway network, it is considered that it would be difficult to substantiate a highway objection based upon that. Well, either the highway is good enough to serve what's being asked of this application, or the highway isn't good enough. And if it isn't good enough, then you need to say that it's not good enough, and you need to be prepared to support that. I mean, to me, reading between the lines there, what it's actually saying to me is, look, we know it's not really good enough, but we wouldn't want to defend this on appeal. And to be honest, I'm not sure that, truthfully, that's good enough. I mean, it does go on in the earlier paragraph 6.5.2, you know, about the issues with it. I have concerns about this. I'm not sure this is right, to be perfectly honest with you. The landscaping for me is an issue. It does say that there will be a negative impact. It doesn't, whilst it indicates they think that will be low, it doesn't qualify, you know, in whose eyes low might be, or what exactly, you know, a small impact would be. Nevertheless, it does say there's an impact. You know, if they planted it 15 years ago and it was going to have no impact, then I wouldn't be raising this as a concern. But it is a concern for me. I think the landscaping issue for me is one that I'm not satisfied with, and I think the highways, both from the local member, from the local residents, and I think indeed from highways themselves, where they say that it's less than ideal, is not good enough. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hunt.
The next indication, Chair, is Councillor Mosley.
Thank you, Councillor Mosley.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions to the officer, please. I see that there was pre-application advice taken on this site. I think it was in May 19, and the advice that the applicants were given that an acceptable number of static caravans would be between six or 7. And it also stipulated that a warden's caravan could not be supported by policy, as it would be an open countryside. Now, I think what's been proposed here is an office rather than accommodation, but perhaps you could clarify that it isn't accommodation, overnight accommodation for someone to live in. But if they were advised that 6 to 7 would be appropriate by one arm of council, and then we get an application for 10. Surely it's hard to defend an application for 10 when we already said 6 or 7, and they add significantly to that. And then the other thing in the pre-application advice, they were requested to submit, I think, an ecological impact assessment. Well, I've looked on the papers and I can't find one of those. I can find the comments from our ecologists, but I can't find that the applicants actually submitted an ecological impact assessment. Perhaps the officer could comment on these issues, please.
Thank you, Councillor Mosley. What I'll do now, I'll take some more questions, let Kelvin get his head together and think about those questions, which are very valid questions. So are there any more questions or comments at the moment?
Yes, Chair. The next request is Councillor Aldcroft.
Thank you, Councillor Aldcroft.
Yes, Chair. Looking at the impact on the area, you've got quite a number of great big white caravans sticking out for the next 15 years until the foliage grows around them. We can't guarantee that these aren't going to be used by somebody looking for a permanent home. The site itself, I wouldn't say is an active tourist site, given the fact that only one of those bungalows has been used, and it's now a residence, contrary to the conditions of the site anyway. We have a whole community coming forward and objecting. We've got the parish council objecting, and a Shropshire councillor. We've got highways who have given us a very vague support to the application and haven't mentioned this recognised dangerous road to be regularly used by agricultural vehicles, which again, with people who aren't used to the area, if they are holiday makers, would be tantamount to putting a risk in there that is unnecessary. The question I have is basically, can we actually put a condition on these vans that they're used for holiday let no longer than 3 weeks or not? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. We'll still let Kelvin think about it. We'll take any more questions or comments at the moment so he can get his thoughts together. Any more comments?
Next, Chair, is Councillor Vasmer.
Okay, Councillor Vasmer.
Thank you, Councillor Vasmer. Yes, I'd just like to pick up the comment that Councillor Aldcroft was mentioning. I'd like to suggest and ask Planning Officer whether it's possible to actually put a time limit on the period that people can stay at the caravans. I think I've heard that said about other caravan holiday parks, that there is a time limit on how long somebody can actually stay there. So I'd be interested in the officer's response to that. Secondly, I mean, I'm doubtful about this application, as do other members, but I would respectfully say that we did consider a similar application regarding glamping pods on the outskirts of Shrewsbury, and some members came to a different view regarding the attitude towards tourism and visual amenity and stuff like that. But I will be consistent in this matter, and I do have concerns about this particular application.
Thank you, Councillor Vasmer. Next, please.
Councillor Dakin indicates he's online and requests to speak.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Dakin.
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry I'm late. I had trouble with my computer. Just to say that, of course, I've got no interest to declare, and I shan't be speaking on this matter.
Okay, thank you very much.
The next indication, Chair, is Councillor Dean.
Thank you. I hadn't really intended to speak, but I think like Councillor Vasmer, I'm just concerned that we're consistent on this. I think some of the concerns, that have been raised are being put in a very different light to how they were when we were talking about the site near Shrewsbury. But just to pick up on a couple of things. So in terms of the the dangers on the road. So I've just been looking at the crash map, and there's over the last 10 years there's 27 results, and they're all on the A41 and other roads. There's nothing recorded on that road, which, I mean, perhaps the local member ought to encourage people to report if there are incidents, but there's nothing recorded. And the other thing is that I'm sure the officer will make this point, but the fact that whether or not there's an economic case for the site is not really a planning condition. We can't really decide on the application on that basis. And then finally, as a caravan owner on a completely different site in Park Shrewsbury, I'm quite used to the fact that conditions are applied, that you can't live there, that and that's a normal thing. And I'm wondering why we're making such a fuss about this particular site, where that's just the normal practice on these sorts of sites, that they're there for holiday use, and that there's like everywhere else that has to be managed because they're not first homes. Thank you.
Thank you. Next one, please.
That's the last one for now, Chair.
Thank you very much. So I think now we can go back to the officers to clarify any statements there, especially from Councillor Mosley and Councillor Aldercroft. All right.
Oi.
Sorry about that. Right, Kelvin.
Thank you, Chair. Kelvin Hall. Yeah, well, going back to Councillor Mosley's comments about the pre-application advice, I think I'm not aware of the details of that. I understand that there was advice given. Clearly, that was given based upon the information that we were provided with at the time by the applicant, and the advice that we gave was in the absence of any formal consultations on the planning application and detailed consideration of the plans, and we're not bound by the advice that we would only allow for a certain number of caravans. And clearly, in the process of dealing with the planning application and looking at the detailed plans, officers have come to a conclusion that 10 static caravans would be acceptable. I accept the point about the warden's office. This would just be for a site office only and not provide residential accommodation, and we would not support residential accommodation of that type in this countryside location. I've read through the advice of the council's ecologist, and they have referred to a ecological survey that has been undertaken, and therefore their comments have been based upon the findings of that, which was a phase 1 habitat and protected species survey, and that was the derivation of the proposed conditions about badgers, for example. In relation to then Councillor Vasma's comment about the time limit, I think officers are satisfied that the proposed condition 12, which prevents residential accommodation permanent, would meet the concerns that the use of the static caravans would only be for holiday purposes. I'm not quite sure why we would need to prevent their use for certain periods, as long as they are not being permanently used around the clock and only for holiday accommodation, and that would seem to meet the objectives of planning policy to restrict permanent accommodation, residential accommodation in the countryside. Sorry, Chair, if there was any further questions which I have not made note of, then I'm happy to respond to them.
Thank you. Just one point from me, Kelvin. It's the office block or reception area. It just seems, for a small caravan site like this with static caravans, I'm not sure if it's needed. I'm really not. 10 caravans. I do question that, I must admit. That was just my personal view on that one. Do you have any more comments, Councillor Mosley? Are you happy with the response you got?
No, I think Calvin's answered what I asked. I do find it rather odd that we give advice, as I say, from one part of the planning department has a view, and then another part has a different view, and it's quite a considerable difference between 6 and 10 caravans. And I find that a little awkward, I'd say.
Thank you. Councillor,
can I just?
Are you happy with your answers?
Mr. Chair, could I just add, please?
Okay, Philip.
We need to be consistent with planning conditions on caravan parks. We have in the past, in response to Councillors Aldercroft and Vasmer's request regarding time periods, put conditions on for up to a month at a time. But as a planning authority, we're increasingly getting requests to remove such conditions because very often site owners now are selling plots off to people as second homes. And they like to come to stop, say, for example, if they've got small children for the entire summer holiday, we'll have to take it over the period of 3 or 4 weeks, which we usually attach. And I believe this is a small site which has been sold off from the previous land connected to it, and therefore I suspect that is the reason why a site office was required by the applicants. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Are there any more questions or statements anybody wants to give?
Yes, Chair. Councillor Hunt is indicating.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hunt.
Councillor Hunt here. Actually, I'm going to withdraw my request to speak. It was probably just to address some of the concerns of some of the less experienced councillors, but I think that's probably best done out of the meeting.
Okay.
Councillor Bardsley is now indicating, Chair.
Councillor Bardsley.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm a little surprised at the reluctance of officers to set time limits. I mean, for 2 reasons. A, because I'm aware, and I'm sure other councillors are, of many sites where there are very clear time limits for the length of a holiday let. But also in practical terms, if you don't set a time limit, when does a lengthy holiday occupation become permanent residence? I don't know how you define that. And it seems to me, if this is supposed to be a site for holiday lets and you don't set a time limit, I mean, is a 10-month stay a holiday let, or is it permanent? I think the vagueness and woolliness of the condition is essentially unsatisfactory, Chair.
Okay, it's more of a comment, I think, but I'll just go back to Philip with that one. Philip, you said there's nothing statutory about this. Is there or isn't there? Can we just have a firm clarification, please?
We have in the past been putting conditions on limiting holiday use because, in fact, we have a colleague in the planning section. Every time he has leave, off he goes in his caravan. Now, he tells me when you're inclined to stop for short stays, you're inclined to use local restaurants, pubs, etc. Whereas the longer stay ones, it's going from one home to another. You're inclined to take the food with you and cook it there, so they're not putting the money into the economy. Local economy. However, the situation is we are increasingly getting requests to vary or remove such conditions, restricting it to a limited period, because a lot of families with young children may well like to come out of an urban environment to rural Shropshire and stay in the caravan for their summer holidays. Well, that is 7 weeks, isn't it, in summer? So they wouldn't comply with the condition if they wanted it for the whole summer. Or that is what we're led to believe from the agents putting the applications in. So we have to, what I tried to say earlier, we have to be consistent throughout Shropshire with how we impose conditions, obviously in relation to the particular environment in which any development is located within.
Right. Okay.
Can I just add to that, please, Chair? Kelvin Hall.
Yes, Kelvin.
Yeah, just picking up on Councillor Bardsley's point. The condition 12, it does prevent the use as a primary accommodation because it requires that the register that is kept includes details of the user's main home addresses as well. So as part of an investigation as to whether or not, permanent use has been established, then we would, look at whether the user of the caravan has also got another property, which is their main home or not. And I think that would provide control that we're looking for. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Just one point that I would like to bring up. Most caravan sites have a season. Now, has this got a season? I did read the papers, but I can't remember what it said about the season. Is it a 10-month season or a 11-month season or 9 months? Or is it all year round? Good question, I feel.
Okay. Yeah, yes, Philip Mullen, Mr. Chair. Yes, I agree with you. Sometimes we have put conditions on seasonal. It's an interesting point you raise. There's no doubt we have had issues in Shropshire with caravan parks, and it's been proven recently as a result of COVID-19, where people have been in breach of conditions, and members may well think if this is acceptable, that they feel it's reasonable to put a condition on restricting the time. It'll be interesting to hear what your opinion is, because it is an issue that has caused debate within Shropshire. We've got an increasingly number of these types of applications coming in. In fact, they've proved very popular in the last 12 months. So I'll be interested to hear whether you feel a condition restricting time is appropriate.
Thank you. Just going back to Kelvin. Kelvin, you're presenting this. Do you know if there's any time limits on this application or not?
It's not proposed, or
right.
But or it's not limited by condition that it will be seasonal. And I think if members were thinking of imposing that kind of condition, it will be, clearly necessary to specify why members thought that was important, that it is only seasonal.
Well, most caravan parks are, but never mind. We'll see what happens. Any more questions, Miranda?
Chair, Councillor Vasmer is indicating.
Thank you, Councillor Vasmer.
Thank you, Chair. Could I just propose on this issue regarding length of stay? Perhaps if we have a condition to restrict it to 10 months of the year, for example. The reason I think it's important is that it's easier to police. If you have a condition like that, it's easier to actually inspect the register and see how long people have been staying in a particular caravan. If you actually ask for people's main residence, then the problem is it's difficult to establish. I mean, it is quite possible for people to mislead, for example, and put down a residence which is maybe they own but don't actually occupy. So I would think for purposes of policing this condition, I think it would be better to actually have a specified length of time, and I suggest 10 months, but I'd be interested to hear what other members have to say about that.
Yeah, okay, thank you for that. Do you have any more questions?
Yeah, Chair, Councillor Oldcroft is indicating. May I just ask, in relation to Councillor Vasmer's last point, is he suggesting that it's 10 months for one individual stay, or that the site itself is only open for 10 months of any particular year? I wasn't entirely clear what he was suggesting.
Well, we'll come to that when we have a proposal, I suppose, but I presume it's for the 10 months for everybody. Yeah. Anyway, we'll wait till we get a proposal and then we'll go from there. So, Councillor Oldcroft.
Yeah, sorry about that, Chair. I had trouble with my buttons. Yeah, I'm just a little bit concerned. Those 5 log cabins, have they still got planning permission? In other words, could he put another 3 cabins in there if he wanted to?
Good question. Thank you, Councillor Oldcroft. Kelvin?
The existing permission is for 5 log cabins, only 2 of which have been cited. 3 more can be cited under the terms of the current planning permission. Clearly, with this particular case, you can't have both, because the caravans would be that would cover the same land as where the log cabins are approved to be as well, and so it'll be an either or type situation. So up to 5 log cabins can be provided at present if the operator wanted to.
I think the question was, Kelvin, if they got permission today, could they have 3 more, have the 10 caravans plus 3 more log cabins?
Yeah.
I know what you're saying, they could win on the same spot, but I'm sure they'd find another space for it, wouldn't they?
There is some common land there, isn't there?
You couldn't. I'm not sure you could physically have both the log cabins and the static caravans because they would be positioned in the same place on the same unit, and therefore, you know, the permission that you would be granting today would be for 10 static caravans instead of 5 log cabins, because it would have to be. It would the log cabins permission would have a condition that requires that the static caravans, are sited in accordance with the layout plan submitted as part of the planning application.
It doesn't actually state specifically that the 3 remaining log cabins wouldn't be able to be built, and I think if it was up for approval, that ought to be a condition. But we'll go on from there. We'll be looking for a thing in a minute anyway. So any more comments?
Not currently, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Are there any more points the planning officer or solicitor would like to clarify at the moment?
No, thank you, Chair. Kelvin Hall. But if it helps for a condition to be imposed that requires that that clarifies the matter about the log cabins being removed, then that can form part of a proposal.
Condition. Okay, thank you for that. Miranda, have you got any comments?
Not at present, Chair.
Thank you very much. If there's no more speakers, please can I have a proposer and seconder? Anybody indicating?
No, Chair.
Okay. A few more secs.
Councillor Green is indicating, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Green.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, having listened to the debate, I think there is, we probably find it very difficult to refuse the application. I think the officers are broadly correct. However, I think we should reflect members' concerns about the time limits. So may I propose the officer's recommendation, but with an amendment or with conditions stating that it can only be used for 10 months of the year. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Do I have a seconder for that?
I'll second that, Councillor Vasman.
Thank you, Councillor Vasman. Okay, we have a proposer and seconder. Now we'll take a vote. The solicitor will read out the names of the committee members in turn. But before that, I'm sure Miranda will want to clarify about the 10 months open. Can I just go back to Councillor Green, maybe possibly suggesting closure on January and February. That's the norm for a caravan park. If you'd like to take that on board, I'm sure they want to be more specific than that.
Yes, Councillor Green agreed with that. Yes.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Vasmir, are you happy with that?
Happy with that, yes, fine.
Yeah, that's the normal thing for caravan park. Anyway, so now I'll come back to Miranda.
That's helpful, thank you, Chair. So you've currently got a proposal to approve the recommendation with the amended a condition to say that this site would be closed for 2 months of the year, namely January and February. Chair, Councillor Bardsley has just indicated.
Okay, Councillor Bardsley.
Forgive me, Chair, but I think it's essential that this question of the extant planning permission is dealt with as well. I mean, it seems to me actually, as things stand, if this application is approved, they would get planning permission for 10 static caravans, and there's nothing to stop them putting the 3 log cabins elsewhere on the site. I don't think, you know, I think that really is, it's essential that that's dealt with. I don't think we can just leave it up in the air.
Good point. I'm coming back to Councillor Green. Are you happy to take that on board, to have that, put that condition on as well?
Well, normally with the permission goes the site plan, and the site plan quite clearly shows that it's going over the top of where the existing log cabins are. But if councillors would be happier with that, such a condition stating that the previous condition, the previous permission has been overruled, then so be it. Put it in.
Thank you very much. Councillor Basme, are you happy with that?
Yes, I'm happy with that. It's fine.
Yeah, I think it's quite a valid point. Does that clarify everything, Miranda?
Chair, you might wish the planning officer to comment. It might be, rather than that it's the consent is overruled, because as you know, caravans, it's a change of use and caravans can come and off on a site. It might be that the you ask for the log cabins to be removed, perhaps, rather than just one, because they've got 2 possible consents, haven't they? But they can't actually have them both at the same time. So it might be more appropriate you simply ask for the log cabins to be removed. But the planning officer might it might be better if he comments on that.
Oh, thank you for that. Kelvin, can I come back to you on that? Is it possible to do that?
Yeah, I would suggest that we have a condition to say that, you know, no static caravan will be occupied until, you know, all of the log cabins have been removed from the site.
Including the other 2, the 2 are already there.
Well, the intention is that ultimately there would only be 10 units of accommodation on the site. So we're looking here at a site of just 10 static caravans, not 10 static caravans and 2 log cabins. 10 static caravans, and that's what is shown on the site layout plans.
Well, that's an interesting one, because one's been sold. Okay, right. What's his people?
Can I make a suggestion, please, Mr. Chair?
Philip, yeah.
Can I suggest if the 3 existing are in the red line, that it's a total of 10 units in total on site in accordance with detail to be approved addition? If you're mindful to approve that there's only 10 units on site, that's irrelevant of the 3 that are there now. If they want to keep the 3 that are there and so have and it's total in 10 altogether, then that should be acceptable, because if they're, I can't see somebody wanting to remove 3 chalets if they're already on site to put a caravan in their place, or 2 chalets. Sorry.
No, can I?
Should be it should be put total a maximum you allow on site in total, which is 10, is my understanding of this application.
Okay, Kelvin, you happy with that?
Well, the application has been put to us on the basis that it's for 10 static caravans, not 10 static caravans interchangeable with log cabins. If the applicant wanted to retain the log cabins, then they could have shown the log cabins on their site layout plan, and they haven't. They proposed that the units will be static caravans. That is my understanding of how the application has been put to us.
Interesting one. Very interesting. Okay, right. Are you happy with that, Councillor Green, Vladimir?
Yes, I'm happy with that.
Yes, Councillor Vladimir, happy with that.
Okay. Miranda, are we all clear now?
So to be clear, it's that we're saying the condition is a maximum of 10 units.
10 units, yeah.
Okay.
And
we know that the 2 plans are effectively exclusive of each other anyway, so.
Yeah, but they are static caravans, the actual application going in at the moment.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes,
right.
Chair.
Yeah.
Are you happy that I put this to the vote now then, Chair?
Yes, please, yeah.
Okay, so councillors, you've heard the proposal then that this is to approve the recommendation with the additional condition to limit the time that the site operates, and also to deal with the fact that there should only be 10 units on the site. So I will ask you if you are for or against that, please. Councillor Aldcroft.
I'm against, still have reservations. Thank you.
Councillor Bardsley.
Against.
Councillor Dakin isn't participating in this one, I understand. Councillor Dean.
For.
Councillor Green.
For.
Councillor Hunt.
I think probably on balance I'm against.
Okay. Councillor Jones.
Against.
Councillor Mosley.
For.
Councillor Roberts.
For.
Councillor Vasmer.
For.
Councillor Wynne.
Oh dear. I'm still not totally happy with it, I must admit, and I know what it means if I vote. I'm going to go against.
Pardon, sorry, Chair, I didn't quite
Against.
Against.
Yeah.
Chair, that therefore means it's a tie, so you have the casting vote. I assume you'll vote the same way as you've already voted, Chair.
I will, yes, against.
That recommendation therefore falls, Chair, and you'll need to seek a new proposal.
Thank you, Miranda. Can I have a proposal, please? And seconder.
Yeah, can I propose that we refuse this application based on the impact on the area, the road network, the substantial mass of the caravans, and the lack of conditions on how the site will be managed.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder?
I'll second that, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bardsley. I have a proposed and seconder. Okay, we'll go to the vote again. Miranda, are you happy with the reasons?
Well, I think we need to just flesh that out a little bit,
Okay,
Chair,
yeah.
because we've got impact on the area, so we need to specify what impact it is that we're saying is a problem. I'm wondering if the proposer is suggesting that it's the visual impact as a result of the substantial mass of caravans that he was referring to. So those 2 points perhaps are drawn together unless there's other impacts, but we need to specify. In terms of the road network, is the councillor suggesting that it's the inadequate nature of the road network to accommodate the additional traffic safely, or is it a risk to the users? Because I would remind members of the MPPF, which says that development should only be prevented or refused on highways grounds if there would be an unacceptable impact on highway safety, or the residual cumulative impacts on the road network would be severe. I'm thinking from the debate you would be talking about the impact on highway safety. It's a question of where does that impact come from in relation to this particular application and what evidence there is to support that. And then I would have some concerns about suggesting there's a lack of conditions on how the site could be managed, because if members feel that a condition would make this acceptable, then you should obviously suggest and propose a condition that would then overcome that issue. So I think perhaps you need to consider this a little further than what you've got. The planning officer might wish to add some comments. I think Councillor Hunt's indicating, I think Councillor Bardsley we took before Councillor Hunt's the new one indicating now.
Okay, Councillor Hunt first, yeah?
Thank you, Councillor Hunt here. Yeah, I mean, I raised some concerns at the beginning of this debate, and it has been a good debate. I mean, obviously all sites are different, and it is my view, and I think the highways officers have alluded to this in their report anyway, that it will be an unacceptable negative safety impact on the existing highway. They state themselves that it's a single track road. There are insufficient passing places. I don't think that that highway would support the introduction of 10 residential units. And let's bear in mind that there is permission currently for 5, and 2 of them have already been built. I'm not going to get into the ways and wherefores, but the other thing that I think is that I think that there will be a negative landscaping impact, which will be gradually negated over a 15-year period. But I believe that that's too long. I think the impact would be a negative impact and would detract from the local scene. And I don't. Yeah, I mean, that's it in a nutshell. I think our highways officers in the report themselves have said, whilst they wouldn't want to defend it at appeal, they do accept that the highway's not really good enough for this sort of development.
Thank you, Vince. Anything about the visual impact? So more clarification on the visual impact.
Yeah,
That's what Councillor Hunt.
I think that's what I gave you. I think the visual. I think there's a negative visual impact, and whilst there is a claim that this can be negated over a period of years, as I said in my spiel earlier, if they put the trees and hedges in 10 years ago, then it wouldn't be a concern of mine. But as it stands at the moment, I think this would have a negative impact on the existing scene for a number of years before that impact was negated.
Thank you. Thank you.
I would agree with that, Chair.
I was going to say, are you happy with that? Proposed and seconder?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yes,
Fine. Is that enough clarification, Miranda?
Yes, you may wish to ask the planning officer to comment, because clearly there'll need to be some reference to the relevant planning policies also in that refusal reason.
Thank you. Kelvin?
Yeah. In terms of the traffic and highways matter, just conscious that it is a permitted site at the moment for 5 cabins, and which has been deemed to be acceptable on highways grounds, where I think it was anticipated that there will be 12 movements per day, and then the current proposal would provide for a doubling of that, because it's doubling the number of units. Presumably members are of the view that it's related to the more intensive use of that access, which is of concern. In relation to the other matter about how the site would be managed, I think in the past on similar sites we have imposed a planning condition to require that site management details are submitted for approval, to explain how the site will be run and the arrangements that will be in place to minimise disturbance in the local area. So my view will be that refusal reason could be addressed through a suitable planning condition. So I would question whether it will be appropriate for it to form part of the refusal reason. And in terms of the visual matters, I've explained in my report the findings of our landscape consultant, but clearly members may want to take a different view to that, and as we did for the previous application, which was refused on similar grounds.
Chair, if I may, Councillor Hunt, it is my belief that it, albeit well, some might call it short term, but I would call it long term, 15 years. It is my belief that it would be visually intrusive to the area and the surrounding countryside, contrary to policy CS6.
Thank you. Right, Miranda, are we happy with that one?
Yes, I think we've effectively got the 2 reasons, haven't you, that you've heard outlined by Councillor Hunt, which is the highways reason and the impact on landscape as a result of the mass of the caravans and the insufficient screening in time, contrary to CS6. So I think you've got those 2 reasons enunciated. So unless the planning officer has anything to add, if you wish me to put that to the vote, I can do.
As he went through about the growth of the screening is just not acceptable and too long, which you've got there, haven't you?
Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, through you. Can I add, perhaps members would like to refer to policy CS16, and I'll read a sentence out to you now, which states development of high quality visitor accommodation in accessible locations served by a range of services and facilities which enhance the role of Shropshire as a tourist destination in rural areas. Proposals must be of an appropriate scale and character for their surroundings. It sounds to me members consider this isn't appropriate in scale in relation to its location. So therefore I would suggest you would include reference to that policy in any reason for refusal if you're mindful to refuse.
Not in the spirit of CS16.
Yes.
Yeah. As well as, yeah. Okay, I think we've got enough meat on the bone now. So, shall we go to the vote, Miranda, please?
Indeed, Chair. Members, you've heard the proposal and it's been seconded. Councillor Aldcroft, are you for or against the proposal?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Bardsley.
For.
Councillor Dean.
Yeah, I'm happy to change my mind. I'm for that.
Okay. Councillor Green.
Against.
Councillor Hunt.
For.
Councillor Jones.
For.
Councillor Mosley.
Against.
Councillor Roberts.
Against.
Councillor Vasmer.
Against.
Councillor Wynne.
For.
Chair, that is 6 in favour of that proposition and 4 against, therefore it is carried.
Thank you very much. Just to clarify, that has gone against the officer's recommendation. Okay, right, we'll move on to item 7. Land south of Little Wicket, Rye Bank, Wem, Shropshire. Erection of local needs dwelling, including garage and access. Can the planning officer present this item, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Philip Mullen, presenting this application. Application proposes erection of a local needs dwelling, including a double garage and access on land south of the Little Wickets, Rye Bank, Wem. Members' attention is drawn to the update sheet and the further comments received from Wem Rural Parish Council. Application site is outlined in red. If you could have the first slide up, please. First slide. Right. Application site is outlined in red. Open countryside location with open farmland to the rear side and on opposite side of the highway in the site's front elevation. There is a farmstead to the north. The buildings alongside the site on the same side of the road also farm buildings and not a dwelling. Next slide, please. This is a further site plan which marks the proposed dwelling within the plot and a detached double garage located alongside on the farmstead side. To the north of the site, you'll see some L-shaped barns. These have been converted into dwellings for them, but they were part of the small farmstead known as Rye Bank Farm. Next plan, please. These are the proposed floor plans and elevations. As members will note, it's a single-storey dwelling amounting to about 100 square metres. Clarification on that has been received from the applicants in consideration of the parish council's initial concerns about the size. Officers satisfied that it does comply with the local needs standard in relationship to size of dwelling. Next slide, please. This is an ordnance survey map of the site. You'll notice in the centre of the application site is marked red, and please note the surrounding area, which is a setting of farmsteads. Officers do not consider this is a part of a linear settlement, or for that matter, part of any settlement. We acknowledge there's names on areas that is common throughout the countryside. There's no area with no name on it. You'll notice Rye Bank is at a junction further down on the bottom of the plan where the arrow is pointing to now, and the immediate area around the site itself is farmsteads. One farmstead as originally in this particular location. Next slide, please. That is an aerial view of the site clearly marked out in red. Ponds to the south of it, rather dilapidated farm buildings, I should say, to the immediate north, and the farmstead on opposite side of the road. Next slide, please. That is the application photograph of the site itself. Next slide, please. These slides indicate the entrance to the site from the highway and looking towards the barn conversions, which are the nearest dwellings to the site, but obviously not alongside them. Members' attention is drawn to the comments as set out in paragraphs 4.15 of the report from Wem Rural Parish Council, who have objected to this application. Also, as I've indicated earlier, there are further comments on the update sheet. The issue with regard to the burning of waste is covered in section 6.8 other matters of the report. Members will note the request by the Parish Council with regards to burning of waste is considered to be outside the planning control of this application. Members' attention is also drawn to both letters of support and letters of objection from members of the public as outlined in the report. Clearly, as set out in the report, the site falls outside of any defined development boundary of a settlement and is neither adjacent to one. Policy CS11 of the local plan is clear on this matter in that local housing, local needs housing and the single plots can only be considered on suitable sites in and or adjoining recognised settlement boundaries. This site, alongside a former traditional farmstead, officers consider does not meet this criteria. Development as proposed representing sporadic residential development in the open countryside. And this was related to the applicants in pre-application advice given in 2019, to which the local member who was called in this application is aware. So officers have been consistent in their advice in relation to this application. It is noted that there are no objections from statutory consultees on matters relating to highway access, ecology and drainage. In conclusion, the application cannot be supported by officers owing to the location for the proposed dwelling, to which officers, as I've indicated, have been consistent throughout, in that the location is considered open countryside, the site not complying with any of the local plan policies with regards to its siting and location, and proximity to suitably recognised named settlements. The recommendation is therefore one of refusal, and for the following reason. The proposed local needs affordable dwelling will not be located within or adjoining a named settlement, representing isolated and sporadic development in the countryside. As such, the proposed dwelling, contrary to policies CS5, CS6 and CS11 of the Shropshire Core Strategy, and policies MD2 and MD7A of the SAMDEV, as well as the supplementary planning document on types and affordability of housing. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That concludes my presentation on this application.
Thank you, Philip, for that. Can the solicitor read out any public speaking statements, please?
Thank you, Chair. The first statement is from Councillor Chris Mellings, and I understand he's joining the committee to read out his own statement.
Thank you. Councillor Mellings, are we there?
Yes, hello, Chairman. I'm here. I'm present.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. Chairman, members of the Planning Committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to committee today in support of this application. The parish of Wem Rural is essentially a scattered collection of settlements and hamlets surrounding Wem rather than a single settlement. The parish council website describes the Edstone ward of the parish as containing the hamlets of Coton, Cotonwood, Creemore, Edstone, Paddle Green, Quinebrook and Rye Bank. Rye Bank is a distinct area of Wem Rural running from Jessamine Cottage in the southwest through to Yew Tree Cottage in the northeast, forming a loose-knit linear settlement pattern either side of the road. Rye Bank is clearly indicated on the Ordnance Survey map and forms part of the postal address of the some 14 properties making up Rye Bank. The proposed location is in a concentrated part of the settlement based around Rye Bank Farmhouse, where there have already been a number of barn conversions, so the residential precedence is already set. Based on the current edition of the Type and Affordability of Housing SPD 2012, the application is consistent with policy as set out in paras 514, 515, 516 and 517. And I quote, 515, each case is treated on its merits, but the following guidelines apply when assessing whether a small hamlet constitutes a recognisable named settlement. A settlement always comprises a group of houses occupied by households from different families. The group becomes a settlement due to the number and proximity of the houses in the group. Although a matter of judgment in each case, particularly for settlements where the number is small or where the houses are dispersed, for example, strung along a road, it is the combination of these two factors that determines whether the dwellings constitute a settlement. Recognisable settlements are also characterised by how local people refer to them, by a place name that is shared by a number of dwellings. This might not necessarily be reflected in the postcode, in the postal address. It will usually, but not always, be named on the Ordnance Survey map. Whether a site is in a recognisable settlement will be influenced by the character of the settlement as set out in paragraph 5.17. The views of the local Shropshire Council member about whether the site is in or adjoining a recognisable settlement as required by Core Strategy Policy CS11 will be canvassed by the case officer at the pre-application stage to inform their professional judgment. The case officer may seek the views of the parish council for additional assistance in cases where this is a finely balanced judgment. Because a settlement is a relationship between different properties, the limits of the settlement are defined by where the relationship peters out. This varies from settlement to settlement depending on a number of factors. For example, a site a short distance from a loose-knit settlement may be considered adjoining, while a similar distance in a tightly clustered settlement would not be. Larger settlements also have a wider pool or sphere of influence than small settlements, influencing the relationship between a site and the settlement. The design and scale of the proposed dwelling is appropriate and does not affect either the landscape or rural character of the area. The proposal is in accordance with policies CS5, CS6, CS17, MD02, MD07A and MD13 of the Shropshire Core Strategy and SAMDEV plan. There is development both sides of the road and it would not result in sporadic or isolated development as it will become part of the Rye Bank cluster of properties. The case officer's report confirms that it would not have an adverse impact on the adjoining residential amenity of existing residents. The application is suitably designed and meets evidenced housing need. All requirements of the policy are met, and members will be aware of the context in which the single plot exception policy was originally introduced to help meet housing need in rural areas for local people. The proposal is similar to and consistent with previous applications under the affordable policy in Wem Rural at Quinebrook and nearby Pool Head, in neighbouring Wixall at Chapel Lane, Brownsbrook and Sandy Bank, and at Crickmerry near Market Drayton, all of which received planning approval. This application is no different to those permissions. The committee will particularly recall the discussion at its December meeting in relation to the settlement issue for an application for a local needs dwelling north of Green Lane Farm, Abbey Green, which it approved. This application raises the exact same issue. Though the parish council neither supports nor rejects the application, a number of parish councillors support it. Support for the application is also demonstrated in paras 423 and 424 of the case officer's report. The planning services manager has previously said that, and I quote, planning is a matter of judgment and interpretation. In planning terms, this application, as with others, would appear to meet both the spirit and letter of the council's current policy. I support the application, and given the reason why the policy was set out in the first place, I would ask the committee to approve it. Many thanks, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Mellings. Any more, Miranda?
Yes, Chair, indeed there are. There's Gemma Foxley and Simon Forbes, who are the applicants. And they state, members of the Planning Committee, thank you for the opportunity to address you this afternoon to ask you to support our application for a local need dwelling. Simon and I have been on this journey for over 18 months in pursuit of an affordable home to house us along with our baby son in the heart of the community where I have grown up and where we firmly consider to be home. The Little Wicket at Ryebank is a modest small holding owned by my parents, but operated and run largely by myself and Simon. Further to continued support we have received from members of the local community and the ward councillors, we appreciate the opportunity for this application to be heard by committee. Being located in the hamlet of Ryebank within the Wem rural parish, this proposal is similar to other rural need dwellings developed in recent years in Edstaston, Pool Head and Quinebrook. It is also worthy to note that the other affordable dwellings granted permission in Wem rural parish are still occupied by the original applicants who are valuable members of the local community. We do not consider the site isolated, particularly when considered in the context of paragraphs 5.12 to 5.17 of Shropshire's type of affordability of housing document. It is evident that the spirit of this policy clearly looks to view proposals for rural affordable housing positively, and by no means provides a definitive definition in terms of what constitutes a suitable site. Albeit our site is bordered by an existing modest range of farm buildings and located opposite to a number of open market dwellings. During the course of the application, we have provided clarification that the size of the proposed single-storey dwelling is in line with the policy guidance, and that the initial ecological concerns raised have been addressed through the raft of measures proposed by our ecological consultant. Claire Hughes in the Housing Enabling team has validated our housing need after assessing our connections to the area and that we are currently living in unsuitable rented accommodation. We note that during the application, comments have been raised in respect of burning commercial waste on the site. Whilst we do not think this is relevant to the assessment of the application, we can assure you that the commercial waste referred to is untreated timber and broken pallets generated by palletised animal feed deliveries. In addition, a recent visit by 2 environmental officers resulted in an 8-page report from the Environmental Agency stating that no unpermitted harmful waste was being burnt. The central issue in the consideration of this application, and the reason why it's been recommended for refusal, is the insistence by the Development Management team that this application is contrary to the policy as it will not be located within or adjoining a settlement and will represent isolated and sporadic unsustainable development. We feel it is clear that the proposal will not result in isolated development and respects the spatial pattern of the area, something which the policy allows. Thus, we would ask you to support our application for an affordable home. Kind regards, Gemma Foxley and Simon Forbes. And that's the final statement on this one. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Miranda. Do the planning officers wish to clarify any points in response?
Yes, please, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Philip Mullen, of course, speaking. Interesting point the local member raised about President Set. May I gently remind him that policy allows conversion of barns in the open countryside. That is a separate policy, and this is what has happened here at this farm, which has in fact happened in many farmsteads throughout Shropshire. So it's a different policy, that is, with regards to barns. If the barns met with the criteria as non-designated heritage assets, then there's policy there to allow them for a residential use. In response to his concerns about pre-application advice, that was given by the council, as I stated during my presentation, and it is noted that the parish council have submitted further comments, but they've maintained their objection. Or rather, they have not removed their objection. Impacts on existing residents? Well, of course there are none, because there are none immediately adjoining the site. So the case officer was quite right in relation to that matter. And finally, you'll see there's a map of the area up for members to see in front of them. The views as outlined by the local member are not shared by officers. This application site is considered by officers not to form part of a settlement known as Rybank. You'll see where the red line is, where the application site is. This cannot be considered a linear settlement with settlements with houses alongside the road. It's a typical sparsely populated area of farmsteads within the immediate area. There is the name Rybank, as I pointed out during my presentation, at the bottom of your screen, as pointed out by the officer presenting the slides before when she pointed to it, as she is now. It cannot be considered a loose-knit settlement either, as it does not run alongside a particular road. Barn conversions in the open countryside, as I indicated earlier, allowed under local plan policy. So therefore, in relationship to location, officers have been consistent and maintain that they do not consider this part of a settlement or adjacent to a settlement as set out in the local plan policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. Okay, members of the committee, can you now comment, please? List will indicate who is to speak.
No one indicating just yet, Chair.
Okay, thank you.
We go. Councillor Mosley is indicated, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mosley. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Could I just clarify something? I think it was the applicants who referred to the. If you could put the plan up of the red line, not that one. No, that's the one. Yeah, either of those. The buildings immediately to the north, which is Little Wicket, I thought they were farm buildings, but I heard it referred to, I'm sure it's by the applicants, as a small holding. And does a small holding not normally imply that there's some residential element to that, or is that not the case? And if it is in, I think it was their parents' control, and they do work from there, is that not habitable as opposed to a new site? Can someone clarify that for me, please?
Good question. Thank you, Councillor Mosley. Philip, could you come back on me with that, please?
Yes. If the barn conversions are on opposite side of the road to the north in an L shape, I believe there's 4 of them. It's a small holding which would contain a farmhouse. However, I asked the case officer to clarify this morning where the parents actually lived. I understand they do not live at this particular holding. In fact, I was told the holding is in separate ownership and that the land on the side of the road where the house is belongs to the applicants. However, I don't consider that a significant issue in any case in relation to this application, whether they live there or not. But I want to confirm it is a small holding, agricultural, small traditional agricultural smallholding, where there have been barns converted recently, as it happens, into residential use.
Just to butt in there, I think Councillor Mosley meant that the houses north to the actual application site, is that in the ownership of those barns or sheds, whatever they are? Is that in the ownership of the applicant, and have they been converted or not?
No,
It's actually Little Wicket I was referring to, not the ones across the road. It was the Little Wicket buildings.
Yeah.
The ones to the north of the site are farm buildings in as part of the farm holding. Whose ownership they are in, I would not like to confirm, as I'm not aware of us having done a land registry search on this site.
Right.
But they are farm buildings on the same side of the road, which were historically connected to the farmstead, which was one farmstead, which would have contained and still contains a dwelling house as a farmhouse, if you like, albeit a small farm.
On the other side of the road?
On the opposite side of the road, yes. On the same side as the road as the red line, there is no dwelling.
Thank you. Okay, all right. Councillor Mosley, I think that clarifies it for both of us. Thank you. Okay, next please. Next
indicating is Councillor Hunt.
Thank you, Councillor Hunt.
Thank you. Obviously didn't get in there quite quick enough at the beginning. I understand the question that Councillor Mosley has just asked. I'm normally horrendously sympathetic to these, and I am actually sympathetic towards this one. That said, there is a policy, and I just don't. I cannot, and I've racked my brains to find of reasons to agree that this is a settlement, a linear settlement, a sparse linear settlement. It isn't. It isn't, and actually the policy, whilst it allows for these for the right reasons, doesn't allow for it to be built in, you know, to be built in areas like this. So I'm not going to support this application. I have supported all of the others, even the one that we had recently in Wixall, where there was some debate with officers about whether it was a linear settlement or not. This one to me clearly isn't. So it's outside of the policy, I'm afraid.
Thank you, Councillor Hunt.
Next chair, Councillor Vasmer.
Councillor Vasmer, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd just like to raise with the Officer Philip Molyneux about the decision we took in December. And really, I think this application is very, as Councillor Mellings points out, is a very similar application. And I think that the really we ought to take cognizance of the fact that the family is based locally. It does have housing need. And I think, as in the December decision, I think we should grant this application. But the other thing is, the question of settlements is an interesting one, because in rural areas, settlements can very often be spread out. It depends on a lot of factors over the centuries. But the way in which people identify with the area is to me quite crucial. And as Councillor Mellings points out, people in this area do identify it as a settlement right bank. So I think we should approve this.
Okay.
Councillor Aldcroft is next, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Aldcroft. Sorry, Roy.
Right, I'll sort this one out later. Right. Firstly, on paragraph 415 of the report, when Rural Parish Council objected the application, based on the information available, they put an information request in. They got the information they required, and no further comments have been received. That tells me that when Rural Parish Council didn't actually object to this, they wanted more information. Secondly, yes, I think looking at the photographs, if you walk out the drive, you bump into a farmhouse across the road. If that isn't some form of settlement, I'd be very surprised. And being like the fella on the number 49 bus, common sense tells me this is a settlement. You know, if this place is built and they walk across to their parents' place, probably to get the children babysat on or whatever, they've got less than 100 yards to go. It's got to be a settlement. And if our policy is saying it isn't, then I'm sorry, we need to rewrite the policy. And it does appear to conform to the Shropshire exception site housing policy. We need young families in farming communities. You know, that's why that thing was written. That's why we give them assistance. You know, we don't want everybody in the cities or the towns. We need people in the countryside, and the only way we're going to keep them in the countryside is by giving them housing. So I'm in favour of this particular application going through. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to clarify one point there, Roy, is that I'm sure Philip's chomping at the bit. I don't think the parents live across the road. Can I just have clarification on that, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That is what I'm led to believe. I have to make it very clear, officers cannot share Councillor Aldercroft's opinion that this is a settlement. It is a farmstead. That is spread throughout the county everywhere. There are farmsteads in the open countryside. And Councillor Vaz, in response to the Parish Council's comments, I have drawn your attention to their further comments as set out in the update sheet. They have not removed their objection, but also officers have given clarification in relation to their points raised, primarily about the size of the dwelling and the burning of plastic, which also the applicants in their response have clarified it was burning of wood. This is set out in the second paragraph in point 4.15 below the Parish Council's comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions?
Yes, Chair. Councillor Dakin is next.
Okay, Councillor Dakin, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I supported one similar to this before Christmas out at Wixall. Now, I can't see this being in the open countryside. This certainly isn't open countryside. There's farm buildings there. There's barn conversions there. The barn conversions aren't affordable. This will be affordable. It's for a local person, and that's exactly what they put this policy in for. And I feel desperately sorry for our officers trying to justify this. And that's the way the policy is at the moment. But however, I think this is okay. I voted for the one at Wixall. I'll vote for the one here because I think this is a local area, a local need in this area, and it won't stand out like a sore thumb in the open countryside. It will fit into that settlement quite well. And I shall be voting for it.
Thank you, Councillor Dakin.
Councillor Bardsley's next, Chair.
Councillor Bardsley, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. A question and a comment, perhaps. I wonder if the officers could just clarify for me. We're getting close to the new local plan being described as an emerging local plan. In fact, I heard it described as that now. It will certainly be in front of an inspector later this year. It seems to me that the whole raft of exception site policies would actually make an application like this much clearer. But maybe I've misunderstood the exception site policies. I've discussed them at length with officers. It does seem to me that we're taking, or officers are taking, a hard line on this one, and maybe in 12 months' time or so, it would be entirely within policy, but perhaps officers could comment.
Thank you. We have to decide what's in front of us, but I hear what you're saying, Councillor Bardsley. If we can have a quick sort of update on that, I don't think it's the right time or place, to be honest. But still, we'll just any comments on that, Philip?
The local plan review hasn't gone sufficiently far enough in its stages yet to be given any significant weight. I do feel I've made it clear to you today what policy CS11 says.
Yeah.
And settlements. I come from a farming background myself. I'm aware of what a farmstead is in the open countryside. If what is being said today, this is part of a settlement, well then there is no countryside in Shropshire. We're one big urban metropolitan area. This is clear, in officers' opinion, it's clearly countryside. We do look at each application on its merits. I hear what Councillor Vasmer said earlier about the one in December. I will remind members that the officer's recommendation on that one was also refusal. However, in relation to that particular site, there was a cluster of farmsteads where that site was located. This one, historically, a cluster of farmsteads. This one, historically, has one small holding, albeit that 4 of the barns have been converted to residential use, which policy allows in the open countryside. There's a difference there between the policy for barn conversions and new build. This representing local new build, albeit under the local plan policy.
Thank you for that, Philip.
As for the local plan review, yes, I believe it has touched on local needs dwelling, but the principle remains that we are supportive of local needs dwellings in appropriate locations. I can't comment on what the nitty-gritty of the policy is, but I believe it's along similar lines now to what it is now. I think the site area has been looked at, and however, like I said, there's no weight we can give to that yet, as it hasn't advanced far enough in the process.
Okay, thank you, Philip.
Next, it's Councillor Jones, Chair.
Councillor Jones, thank you.
I'm probably going to raise Mr. Molyneux's temperature even higher and say that I agree with Mr. Aldcroft and Gerald. I think it is a settlement. I think there's 6 houses there now, so I think I would probably support this.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Right, Miranda, anybody indicating?
No, there isn't, Chair. Might I just advise briefly? I think it's important that members take account of the fact that obviously you're obliged to take decisions in accordance with the policy unless there are material considerations. So first of all, you've got to understand what the policy says, which is a matter of law and not just general judgment. And we understand, of course, that this means that any such dwelling needs to be in or adjacent to a recognisable named settlement. So of course you've then got to identify a settlement. Now, as you've heard, this is a farmstead with some barns that have been permitted as in open countryside. So just because you've got some barns permitted doesn't turn one farm necessarily into a settlement. So the advice you've been given is that this isn't a settlement, and if this particular grouping of dwellings is a settlement in and of itself, which appears to be what members are suggesting, then is that a separate settlement to Rybank, which is located somewhere different according to the map you have seen? Because I think the suggestion members are making is it's the conversion of the barns that have turned a single farm into a settlement. Well, that in a way creates a new settlement, whereas that really, and that's not a separate named settlement of itself, is it? So you need to think about the actual case you've got before you and this what settlement you're saying this is in. And reference has been made to other cases that you've had recently, but each settlement in Shropshire in each area is of course different itself, and the layout and nature of the dwellings will be different as the case officers indicated. So it's quite hard to compare case for case because every bit of geography and layout is a little bit different. So I think it's really important that you think about what findings you are making in relation to this, notwithstanding the totally understandable and rightful sympathy for the applicants.
Thank you. I was just about to ask you if you had any comments, Miranda, but you just had them. Are there any more points that the planning officer or Miranda would you like to state before we ask for a proposed?
No, as case officer, I've got nothing further to add. I think I've made my views, or that of officers rather, abundantly clear.
Yeah. Miranda, you okay?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Right. If there's no speakers, please can I have a proposer and a seconder?
Well, Councillor Vasma here. I'd like to propose that we accept this, approve this application on the basis that, as Councillor Mellings has outlined in his piece in the report on 5.2.5, that this is part of Rybank, and this forms, and I mentioned in my contribution earlier, that this is a loose-knit linear settlement, and that this can be considered part of that settlement. And secondly, on the basis that it accords with policies CS5, CS6, CS17, MD02, MD07A and MD13 of the Shropshire Core Strategy and the Sound Deaf Plan.
Thank you, Councillor Vasma. Do I have a seconder?
I'll second that, Councillor Aldcroft.
Thank you, Councillor Aldcroft. Okay, we have a proposer and seconder. So we can go to a vote, please, Miranda. Unless you want to clarify any points, sorry, or clean it up, the reasons for going against the officer's recommendation.
Chair, I think it's difficult for the, given the proposal, for it to be considered as a linear settlement. I think perhaps the reason for approval, if you're giving one, is you'd have to at least say it's a sparsely, a sort of scattered settlement, because the plan that we saw of the road layout with the individual dwellings wasn't linear, was it? Really, there was sort of more roads than linear. So I think linear might be an unfortunate word in there when it plainly is not. But you'd also want added to that recommendation so that we'd need conditions. So you'd need the usual conditions for a single dwelling. So that would need the usual accordance with the approved plans and various other ones that I think I'll ask the planning officer just to run through. And you'll also need the recommendation that there's a section 106 agreement to secure that this is affordable in perpetuity in accordance with the policy for these sorts of dwellings. So I think if the planning officer just runs through the heads of the list of things that would go into conditions, as we've put on similar dwellings in the past, but they do need just to have those before you vote on this.
Okay, can I have clarification, please, Philip?
We need to conditions attached with regards to external construction materials, removal of permitted development rights, conditions on highways as per the highways officer recommendation in his response to the application. There would also be the need for ecology consideration and conditions as recommended by the ecologist and as well as informatives, and just a drainage condition with regard to sustainable surface and foul water drainage, and a section 106 to ensure that the house is retained in perpetuity in local needs occupancy.
It's the most important one in my view, but there you go. Okay.
Chairman, before we take the vote, can I just say one of my reasons for it was I still believe it was part of the settlement of Rybank, and the conversion of those barns into dwellings really substantiates this. It makes it even more of a settlement.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that, Dakin.
So, thank you, Mr. Chair. Can I just respond? I'm sorry, Councillor Dakin, but I cannot agree with you. Officers do not accept what you're saying when they look at the your local plan policies is what we're here to interpret, and when we access those plans policies in relationship to this application, we cannot accept what you've just said.
Okay, thank you for that. Right, Miranda, I think are we happy with? Oh, hang on a sec. Do the proposal sector like to take those on board?
Yes, Councillor Vasma here, accept those.
Councillor Aldcroft, yes, I'm happy.
Thank you for that. Miranda, are we happy to have a vote now?
Yes, Chair. Thank you, councillors. You've heard the proposal and that it will have the conditions as outlined and a 106 agreement as also outlined, and this is to approve give planning permission for this application. So are you for or against? Councillor Aldcroft.
For.
Councillor Bardsley.
For.
Councillor Dakin.
For.
Councillor Dean.
Against.
Councillor Green.
Against.
Councillor Hunt.
Against.
Councillor Jones.
For.
Councillor Mosley.
Against.
Councillor Roberts.
Against.
Councillor Wynne.
Against.
Councillor Vasmer.
For.
That is 5 in favour and 6 against. So that proposal falls, Chair, and you'll need another proposition.
Thank you very much, Miranda. Can I have a proposer, please, and a seconder for?
Chair, happy to make a proposal. For the reasons outlined by officers, I recommend that we should go with officers' recommendations with sadness, because as the solicitor said, it's always very sad. We put a human face on this because there is one. However, this is not the right place for a dwelling. So I recommend we go with the officers' recommendations.
I'll second that from the chair. Okay, can we have a vote on that, please, Miranda?
Thank you, Chair. So this vote is now in accordance with the officer recommendation to refuse the application. I will ask you if you are for or against that. Councillor Aldcroft.
Against.
Councillor Bardsley.
Against.
Councillor Dakin.
Against.
Councillor Dean.
For.
Councillor Green.
For.
Councillor Hunt.
For.
Councillor Jones.
Against.
Councillor Mosley.
For.
Councillor Roberts.
For.
Councillor Wynne.
For.
Councillor Vasmer.
Against.
Chair, that is 6 in favour of that proposition and 5 against, so that is carried.
Thank you very much. Just to clarify, that's going with the officer's recommendation. Okay, moving on to item 8 now. The Rockley Northwood Shrewsbury erection of 2-storey extension, single-storey entrance, porch, re-rendering existing house, replacing windows, remodeling existing side entrance, and clad the timber to match the new extension. Could the planning officer please present this, please?
Thank you, Chair. Kelvin Hall, Principal Planner. This is an application as described by you, Chairman, for principally the erection of a 2-storey extension with other works, as shown on the slide. I would draw your attention to the additional letters relating to the application. The first is from the Parish Council, who have advised that they have read the committee report and continue to support the application. The second is from Councillor Mellings, who has provided photographs, which he will refer to in his statement. I've also included those photographs later on in this presentation. First slide, please. So the existing dwelling is shown towards the south of the application area, outlined in red and with the blue dot within it. As you can see, it's within a large plot and in a countryside location. Next slide. This is another slide showing the application boundary and the existing footprint of the house shown towards the south of the plot, with agricultural outbuildings shown to the north. Next slide. And this shows the proposed siting of the extension to the side extension, to the side wing of the property. Next slide. This is the existing plans and elevations. As you can see, the property is relatively large at present. It has already been extended under a 1988 permission, which is extended it to the rear, and I'll show you where that is on subsequent slides. Which and you can also see that on the floor plans on the left hand side, where the rear has been extended outwards. Next slide. This shows the proposed extension, which would be the grey element on the elevation plans. It would be a 2-storey side extension to the house. As you can see, it would have a slightly stepped down ridge in relation to the existing property, slightly set back from the main principal elevation. Next slide. This shows a previously approved extension, which was approved last year for a 1-storey extension in grey, which is on the same footprint as the proposed 2-storey extension, subject to the current application. The one that we're looking at now, this application was originally submitted for a 2-storey extension. However, officers negotiated a reduction in the scale to what is shown here in order to make it acceptable.
Again, I didn't think it had printed.
Next slide, please. So this is the existing property. You can see on the left-hand side the extent of the previous 2-storey extension with the dotted line, and then the location of where the 2-storey extension will come out in relation to the current application. Next slide. This is another view. Again, on the left-hand side, this is the extended bit, which was permitted in 1988, and then the new side extension would protrude from the right-hand side on this photo. Next slide. And this is the view from the opposite side of the house. Next slide. And this is a view of the front elevation of the house, and it shows approximate position of the side 2-storey extension proposed. Next slide. These photos have been provided by the applicant, and I understand that Councillor Mellings will also refer to them as well. You can see the house in white in the foreground here, and then its position in relation to the agricultural outbuildings, and then the landscaping that surrounds the plot, and that it's set back from the public highway towards the top right of the photograph. Next slide. And these are more photographs from the applicant showing the house in its setting and the existing mature vegetation around the plot. Next slide. Okay. So if we can go back to one of the previous, I think it's 39, slide 39, please. Yeah. The committee report notes that the property is a non-designated heritage asset and that the conservation area has raised no objection, albeit that a 1-storey extension would be preferable. In addition, you'll note that the parish council does support the proposal. Officers do acknowledge that the house is set back from the public highway and has limited visibility from public viewpoints, and also that the proposed renovation works would be acceptable in improving the appearance of the existing house. However, the concern is that the 2-storey extension would represent overdevelopment, particularly considering the previous amount of enlargement that has taken place to the property, which was formerly a modest-sized dwelling. As set out in the committee report, our supplementary planning guidance seeks to control the size of extensions in the countryside and refers to the need to ensure that development is sympathetic to the character and appearance of the original building. In this case, officers consider that this would not meet these objectives and are therefore recommending that planning permission is refused. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Kelvin. Can the solicitor read out any public speaking statements, please?
Thank you, Chair. The first statement in relation to this is from a Mr. David Wicks, who is a neighbour and speaks in support of the application. And he says, I would like to support the application and ask the Chairman and members of the committee to consider the points identified below to endorse and pass this application. While the rookery does appear on the Historic Environment Record, it does so purely by the fact that it is old and not due to any architectural merit. The rookery is currently a rundown property in need of significant modernisation to remove the ingress of moisture, damp and years of neglect. The rookery is a detached property situated within a 3-acre plot and is not visible from the road. Even at night, no lights are visible from the house. The proposed extension is not significantly large and would not alter the road perspective. In terms of its overall scale, the extended property will still be smaller in scale and appearance than the neighbouring properties of the Woodlands, Lane Farm and West View. I understand that application 1905250 full approved a single-storey extension, and this application is for an extension of the same footprint but slightly under 2 metres taller than that already approved. If the rookery had been constructed between 1st July 1948 and 28th of October 2018, the owners could add the additional storey under permitted development based upon the original approval. The proposed additional 1.9 metres seems very modest compared to what could have been an overall height of 18 metres under different circumstances. The applicants are a family of 11. The NSPCC website quotes, as kids grow up, they want more privacy and need their own space, especially if they're sharing a bedroom with a brother or sister. While it's not illegal for them to share, we recommend that girls and boys over the age of 10 have their own bedrooms, even if they're siblings or step-siblings. If the family of 2 adults and 9 children living at the rookery were currently being provided social housing by the council would be obliged to provide under their own guidelines a 7-bedroom house, meaning the rookery would not be acceptable accommodation in its current state. By refusing the application, which provides the additional bedrooms for the growing children, the committee could be suggesting that the NSPCC recommendations and their own published social housing guidelines are either not important, do not apply in Shropshire, or are immaterial to the well-being of children who are not supported by the council. In addition to the above, 7 of the children are in full-time education, and the older ones, especially during this COVID pandemic, really need to have an appropriate learning space where they can reach their full potential. Refusing the application could be detrimental to their educational provision, in contradiction of the Council's own published obligations of helping children access an appropriate provision of education and the ability to study. And that's the end of that statement, Chair. The next statement is Councillor Chris Mellings, who has joined the committee to read his own statement. Chair, you're muted, I'm afraid.
I apologise. Councillor Mellings, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman. As with the previous application, Chairman, members of the Planning Committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak to committee today in support of this application. From a planning perspective, given the nature of the dwelling, I don't believe the current application causes significant harm to the non-designated asset and is therefore consistent with paragraph 197 of the National Planning Policy Framework and policies MD13 CS17 of Shropshire's local plan. The Conservation Officer, in his response, has indicated he has no principal objection and makes no reference in the report to any visual impact or recommended amendments. The proposals do not compromise the original and ensure its form is recognisable and therefore does not overwhelm the current dwelling. Based on this and the Conservation Officer's comments, it would appear the current proposals satisfy the requirements of policy CS6, CS5 and items 2, 3 and 7, supported by paragraphs 3.6, 3.7 and 3.9 of MD2. Reference is also made in the report to the original cottage. The original cottage was a large 3-bedroom dwelling, so perhaps it wasn't that small. It would also meet the needs of this large family and whilst perhaps not an immediate planning consideration, nevertheless is a factor. Paragraph 6.1.6 of the report indicates that, and I quote, "The policy requires a mix of housing to be available, whilst there is a need to maintain acceptable living standards for the occupants of dwellings, including the internal size of living accommodation and the provision of external amenity space. Meeting the needs of the family, how many properties are capable of accommodating a family of 11, does not compromise the planning issues, and the proposals are both sustainable and complement the existing dwelling, which is set on its own and back from the highway, so causing no visual harm and no adverse impact on any neighbouring property. There exists a mix of housing in the area that satisfies the concerns expressed in paragraph 6.2.1 of the report. Paragraph 6.2.6 of the report refers to the scheme modernising and refurbishing the wider dwelling, which are considered acceptable. This application should be seen as complementing this work and meeting the family's needs. Clearly, the Conservation Officer has no principal objection to the application, and the proposal is not out of context or character either to the existing dwelling or the surrounding area. To that extent, it does not represent overdevelopment in the context of the dwelling and site. The dwelling is well screened, as you will see from the plan, well set back, and cannot be seen visually from the road. It will help create a functional dwelling whilst fulfilling the need for a mix of housing as set out in the SPD on the type and affordability of housing. With my statement, I attached some photographs which show the context of the site and existing dwelling, and those were presented in the case officer's opening remarks. It is not proposed to increase the size of the footprint of the previous approval, merely to increase the height of the extension by 1.9 metres. Again, the Conservation Office has no principal objection to this, and the roof line reflects any concerns Conservation may have. The Planning Services Manager has previously said that, and I quote, "Planning is a matter of judgment and interpretation," unquote. In this instance, therefore, I strongly feel there are no material planning reasons, as outlined in CS6, CS5, CS17, MD2, MD13 and paragraph 197 of the MPPF for this application not to be approved. I would therefore ask the committee to exercise its judgment on this application. The Parish Council also supports the application, as do the adjoining neighbours. In planning terms, this application would appear to meet both the spirit and letter of the Council's current policy. I fully support the application and would ask that on balance of all the issues, the committee approve it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Mellings.
Chair, there's now a statement from the applicant in this matter. It's Phil Goldsby, if you'd like me to read that.
Thank you.
Okay. He states, Chairman and members of the committee, thank you for considering this application. We moved into the Rookery in August 2019 with our family of 9 children. We were excited moving from a 4-bed suburban house with a little garden to this 3-acre plot, giving the children space to spread and enjoy country life. We fell in love with the house, but sadly the previous owners had neglected integral parts of the house, and the survey showed multiple things that had not been maintained for decades. The rendering was letting damp into the brickwork in many places, electrics were old and unsafe, windows were rotten and drafty, and the heating system was dire. However, we moved in with grand plans to maximise the potential for our family. As an old farmhouse with still enough land to be useful, we wanted to regenerate the historic nature of the plot and bring it back to a traditional homestead. To this end, we have pigs, chickens, and even 2 cows grazing the land and allowing us to enjoy home-produced milk, eggs and meat. We've also reinstated a large vegetable plot that existed over 20 years ago, but was since laid to grass, to provide ourselves with part of our vegetable needs. In total, this provides us with 30% of our food needs for the family. We've also replaced the inefficient oil boiler for a ground source heat pump, providing us with energy-efficient heating, and are investigating the merits of solar power to make our living even more sustainable. The current house has 5 bedrooms, one of those on the ground floor. This means we currently have 4 bedrooms for the 9 children. Multiple rooms have 3 children in them. 7 of the children are in full-time education, with the 2 eldest, one doing GCSEs this year and the other a BTEC Level 3 final exam next year, needing space to study with the privacy to enable learning. We're asking for you to approve this planning application, enabling a bigger kitchen on the ground floor and 2 extra bedrooms above. This would mean that the children, as they get older, would have their own rooms for studying and relaxing. It would also give us a large kitchen diner to be able to accommodate the cooking and eating requirements for 11 people daily. Our previous application, which was approved after we removed the bedrooms, allowed us to build the kitchen with the idea to convert the loft to bedrooms. After investigation, this has been deemed impractical as it would require either roof raising or ceiling lowering to comply with building regulations. This new application doesn't expand the footprint already granted and only requests 1.9 metres in additional height. There have been no objections to the planning application, approval from the Conservation Officer and indeed strong support from both Wem Rural and our councillor. The house and proposed extension is not visible from any public highway or footpath. The application is the only way we can gain needed bedrooms for our children. The house would also become an environmentally sound structure that would provide suitable accommodation for us and our generations to come. We are trying to bring our house and land back to its roots as a small holding for our family. Thank you. And that's the last of the statements on this application, Chair.
Thank you very much, Miranda. Does the planning officer wish to clarify any points in response?
Yes, please, Chair. Kelvin Hall. Just making reference to the comments of on the first statement from Mr. David Wicks, and he made reference to the NSPCC guidelines and guidelines of the council's social housing as well. Just a point that accepting those, they don't override planning policy, and that is the basis upon which the application is being considered. It's noted that the applicant moved into the house relatively recently in August 2019. Following that, an application was put forward for a 2-storey extension to the house, and noting the applicant's personal circumstances, these should be given limited weight in the planning process as it deals with land use planning issues, and that this is the basis upon which the recommendation has been made. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. Right, members of the committee, can you comment, please? Miranda will indicate who's to speak.
Just waiting for some indications, Chair.
Okay, thank you. All gone very shy.
Councillor Hunt, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hunt.
Councillor Hunt here. This is again is really quite a difficult one. This is a house we've heard the applicants bought in 2019, so relatively recently. They do have a large family. It perhaps might not have been that large quite then, but not far off, I wouldn't have thought. I suppose one of the obvious questions you would ask is why didn't they buy something with you know, nine or 10 bedrooms? And I guess the obvious answer to that in a way is that unless they're buying an old boarding school, they're not really going to find anything like that. I mean, I'm in two minds about this. I don't like buildings growing exponentially from their original footprint. This one has already. There is an existing permission for a single story. This is just going up, I think, slightly less than 2 meters. And it's one of those difficult ones because, you know, obviously this is an unusually large family. And I'm thinking, you know, mainly of the youngsters here who need the room. I did note that one of the first speaker was talking about these COVID times and room for education. I would imagine that there would be significantly less room if they started doing the extension during lockdown, because with the youngsters at home, there's obviously going to be a lot of dust and a lot of noise. So to me, in a way, that was a bit of a red herring, for want of a better word. I'm not, in many ways, unsympathetic to this. It'll be interesting to see what other members have to say. It is going to create a large home, but this is a large family. It's one of those really exceptional circumstances. I'm minded, in a way, to support the applicant on this, but I'd be interested to hear what other members have got to say. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hunt. Next, please.
I haven't got anyone else yet, Chair.
Thank you, Miranda.
If I could speak, Chairman, please. Gerald Dakin.
Thank you, Councillor Dakin.
It has had an extension awarded it. And I wondered when I first saw this application why they hadn't built that, why they needed to go with a secondary extension to make it higher. It was explained quite well that when they put in the original application, they put it single story because they thought they would be able to get a conversion into the roof space. It's proved this is not possible. And I would think now that it's the reason for doing this extension was to get those extra 2 bedrooms. The only way they can get these extra 2 bedrooms is with this new application. And I would support this application because I think it's a special needs family.
Thank you, Councillor Dakin.
Councillor Roberts is indicated, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very quiet today, but I agree with what's been said by my 2 colleagues. This is a special case for a family that desperately needs more accommodation to accommodate their children. Yeah, and yes, there has been extensions in the past, but looking at the photographs that have been provided, it can't be seen from the public highway. It's well screened, and I can't really see the problem with it, so I will support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Roberts.
No one else yet, Chair.
No one else? There's no one else to speak. Are there any points that the planning officer or solicitor would like to clarify now? With a comment, so.
Not for me, Chair.
Okay.
Before can I, Mr. Chair?
Thank you, Philip.
Can we be very clear where the front elevation is and the impact on this? It's clear to me that there are material considerations here with regards. It is a large family, and obviously they need considerable amount of accommodation. I was wondering, is there any mileage in deferral to look at an extension maybe on the rear of it, or is there any mileage in something that's not so conspicuous? But I'd like to have it made clear where the front elevation of this house is, because it looks like to me, almost, if I'm correct in thinking, looking at the plans before us, where the extension is going is right bang on the front. Am I correct, Calvin?
No.
Am I wrong? Am I getting? I'm a bit confused here.
Well, it is slightly confusing, and partly because of the amount that the house is set back from the public highway as well. But it is described as a side extension. If you look on the top right there, then you can see it coming out from the side of the property, which so it wouldn't be a front extension, it would be a side extension.
Thank you for that, Calvin. There's no weight there then, Philip, really, is there? It's not a front extension.
I couldn't make out where the front elevation was. I was just looking at it now thinking, well, which one is?
So it is a side extension, so it's not a front extension, it's a side extension. So, okay, we're happy with that.
And sorry, Chair, Kelvin Hall, clearly it's set back within its own plot. And I appreciate that in terms of normal considerations, we would want to limit, extensions to the front of the property. But with this one, it's slightly odd because of its the existing vegetation that surrounds the plot, and it's detached and fairly remote nature in terms of other properties as well. So moving it to a different elevation wouldn't necessarily make it any more visually appealing, for example, on a point of principle.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, there's no more speakers on the
hold on, Chair, there is that. I've just had Gerald Dakin has indicated, but I think he may already have spoken, but the things just come into the chat. You may wish to check. And then after that, Councillor Vasmer, then Councillor Oldcroft.
Yeah.
With all due respect, Miranda, I think you'll find I was just in front as well, but I'm happy to defer to Councillor Dakin now you've called him.
Oh, beg your pardon, Councillor Hunt, you were just ahead of Dakin. I apologise.
Oh, sorry about that. Thank you very much. I would, looking at this now, I think there's very little you could do to get the amount of bedrooms that's required. It's not pretty, but I think the other extension was a single story, and that wasn't pretty either. This makes it a little bit better, I think, and I'd like to propose that we accept this application.
Approve the application. Okay, do I have a second for that?
And I'm going to second that, and I'll give you my spiel when you've taken that.
Okay, thank you. Right, we've still got Councillor.
Well, I haven't spoken yet.
No,
I've seconded it, but I still want to speak if that's all right.
Okay, go for it.
Thank you, Councillor Hunt. Yeah, I don't. I mean, having listened to this, obviously one of the principal concerns that officers have is kind of the unwieldiness, and Philip did indicate that possibly a deferral because of building an extension on the front. We then had some debate amongst officers about actually what was the front, and it kind of struck me that if we're not entirely sure what the front of the building is or where it is, then obviously this building has already grown and changed sufficiently for the historic element to me no longer apply. I'm happy to second this. I think it isn't something that I would normally agree with. I think this building has grown already. It's obviously changed to the point where we're not exactly sure where the front is. It is set back from the highway. It is well screened. This is an exceptional circumstance because it's such a large family. So I'm happy to second and support the proposer in moving that we accept this application.
Thank you, Councillor Hunt. Right, moving on to Councillor Vasmer.
There's no need for me to speak now, Chair.
Thank you for that. Councillor Oldcroft.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, just to support what's already been said, really. It's a unique building with a unique family, and I'll support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, we're proposed and a seconder. Nobody else to speak. So coming back to the planning officer and solicitor, would you like to clarify anything there, Miranda, actually?
Chair, I think I'd just indicate to members that the policy on restricting the size of dwellings in the countryside is to move away from the trend of larger and more expensive dwellings and try to keep an appropriate stock of smaller, lower cost dwellings. That's what it says in the SPD. Members might reach the conclusion with this one that it is already not particularly small dwelling, and so it's kind of in a way that horse has already bolted, you may feel, in terms of the policy. So you might feel that it's not actually against that in some ways, as you've pointed out, the unique circumstances of this case. So that was all I would mention to members in considering the policies before you.
Okay. You have to take that on the proposed and seconder that it's gone past being a small house anyway because it's a 5-bedroom one anyway. Yeah?
I've already said it.
Right. Okay. All right, so I think we can go for the vote now, Miranda.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I just think as the proposal is to grant this planning consent, you just probably, I would advise you to invite the planning officer to indicate if there should be any specific conditions, or at least the nature of it, because we do need some conditions on a planning consent.
Okay, thank you for that, Miranda. Yes, I'll go back to the planning officer.
Thank you, Chair. Well, yes, just the standard conditions for an extension, which would be to require that it's implemented within 3 years, that the development's carried out in accordance with the approved plans, and that details of the external materials are submitted for approval. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Happy with that proposal, seconder? Yeah.
Can I just interrupt there, please, a minute?
Okay, Philip.
Would you, I don't know where the original rear elevation is, but would permitted developments need to be removed? Because remember, they're very generous now. The reason this has come in because they wanted it 2-storey.
Exactly that. I'd accept that.
Okay. Yep. Right. Okay. Well, right.
To be clear, the proposal then is to remove any existing permitted development rights for further extensions, because there are other rights people have. Is that the understanding of the proposition?
That is correct, yes.
And that's my understanding as seconder.
Yes.
Okay, that's quite clear now.
Would you like me to take the vote then, Chair?
Then, please, Miranda. Yes.
Thank you. So that's to approve this planning application against the officer recommendation with the conditions as indicated. Please tell me if you are for or against that. Councillor Aldcroft.
For.
Councillor Bardsley.
For.
Councillor Dakin.
For.
Councillor Dean.
For.
Councillor Green.
For.
Councillor Hunt.
For.
Councillor Jones.
For.
Councillor Mosley.
For.
Councillor Roberts.
For.
Councillor Vasmer.
For.
Councillor Wynne.
It'll be the odd one out. Against.
Okay. Well, that is 10 in favour and 1 against, Chair, so that's carried.
Thank you very much. To clarify that, gone against the officer's recommendation there. Okay. Right. Moving on. We come to item 9 now. Land south of Bridgewater Street, Ellesmere, Shropshire. Erection of a mixed residential development of 23 houses, dwellings rather, formation of vehicle and pedestrian access, amenity space and associated works. Could the planning officer present, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Philip Molyneux presenting this one. Application is made in full and proposes erection of 23 dwellings, formation of vehicular and pedestrian access, amenity space and associated works on land south of Bridgewater Street, Ellesmere. There are no updates to this application. Application site, which is classed as a brownfield site and is allocated for residential development in accordance with the local plan outlined in red as on the slide. If you go to the first slide up, please. And the site is adjacent to very recent residential development located to the south side of a Tesco store in Ellesmere. Alongside the eastern boundary of the site is the Shropshire Union Canal. That's clearly marked to the right of the screen, and you'll see the residential on the opposite side. Next slide, please. That is the site outlined in red alongside existing residential development of very recent construction. The site part of a wider brownfield site which has been for redevelopment. Next slide, please. The proposed site layout plan indicating 23 mostly semi-detached dwellings. Next slide, please. The proposal also includes provision for landscaping on the eastern side of the site adjacent to the canal. That is the green buffer running down the right hand side as I'm sitting in front of the screen here now, and you'll see the canal running down, outlined in green. Next slide, please. This is an example of the proposed street scene forming part of the development. As you can see, typical two-storey cottage style dwellings, and there are provision for some single-storey, similar the two-storey ones to the ones within the immediate vicinity. Next slide, please. Right, the detail in support of the application includes reference to boundary treatments. Next slide, please. There's now comes a sample of the elevation and floor plans for the proposed dwellings. These two, you'll notice, have some brick to the lower half, and there is timber cladding to some gable elevations. This slide shows a pair of semi-detached dwellings with 2 bedrooms. Next slide, please. Two-storey cottage style brick. Those are similar to the existing, which there'll be a photograph of later. Next slide, please. Further two-storey dwellings, semi-detached, again with no cladding. Next slide. These are single-storey semi-detached bungalows. 1 bedroom. Next slide, please. Further bungalows, again semi-detached. These obviously slightly larger. Next slide, please. Back to some dwellings, 2-storey dwellings, more with cladding on. These are plots 16 and 17. Next slide. Right. Significant amount of these, 6 of them, and again, traditional in construction, brick outside, external, and 2-storey. Further, next one, please, slide. These are photographs of the site. This is taken from the entrance to the site, which is off Bridgewater Street, just beyond the Tesco store. And that's looking across the site, like I said, from the entrance. Obviously, the site notice, as you can see on the slide there, placed on the entrance to the site. Next slide, please. These are taken off looking into the site. You'll see the existing residential development in the background, trees in the forefront here, which are to be retained wherever possible and enhanced as part of the landscape barrier to protect the area, as it is the conservation area the canal falls into. The site itself is outside the conservation area. Next, final photograph, please. This shows that the site taken from alongside the existing dwellings. You can see again a semi-detached 2-storey of brick construction and another dwelling in the background, which is alongside the canal, which runs on the opposite side of the site. Members' attention is drawn to section 6.6 of the report and the historic environment and concerns raised by the conservation manager with regards to character and appearance of the development. The site, as I've indicated, is located adjacent to the Ellesmere Conservation Area, which is located alongside the site's eastern side. There are also listed buildings within the vicinity of the conservation area to which impact on these specific buildings is considered acceptable. Please note the officer's conclusions on the historic aspect as outlined in paragraph 6.611 of the report and the material considerations in relation to the brownfield status of the site and remediation costs to make the site suitable for residential development. It is considered the conditions as indicated in Appendix 1 attached to the report are necessary and will address issues of concern. These specific conditions numbered as 4, 9, 10 and 11. While there are no objections from any of the other statutory consultees, there was considerable work with this application post its validation, as a number of issues were raised that needed further consideration, and members will note concerns raised with regards to drainage and flooding issues. The site is within the flood risk area in accordance with the Environment Agency data maps. These issues have now been addressed to an acceptable standard, along with some of the other issues during the application processing. The ecology team raised no objections subject to conditions as indicated in Appendix 1. Members will also note that there's a copy of the Habitat Regulations Assessment for the site attached as Appendix 2 to the report. No objections to the proposal on highway and transportation matters, subject to conditions with regards to a construction management plan and details of the construction of the state roads and footpaths. Please also note section 6.8 of the report and a section 106 community infrastructure levy application proposes 4 affordable dwellings. The section 106 agreement would also need to make provision for the open space provision and financial contribution as outlined in paragraph 6.26 of the report in relation to open space provision. I must make it clear to members who will be aware this is a Conolvi-led application, and they are a separate company and therefore a separate legal entity. They are not a council controlled company, although it owns the company. There is an important distinction. This is an important distinction, as it is what allows them to operate within the open market. So in reality, they have to be treated like any other developer. So far as the section 106 is concerned, it depends who owns the land, the time the permission is granted. If it is a council, the legal agreement will need to take the form of a memorandum of understanding with a draft section 106 attached if the land has been transferred into Conolvi's ownership. Otherwise, it would be a normal 106 agreement. There are no objections from either Ellesmere Town or Rural Parish Council, as outlined in section 4 of the report. I must also add the comments as made by the Canals and River Trust have been taken into consideration. Members will note they've raised some extensive views in their response, as copied out in full as part of your report. In conclusion, the application is considered acceptable for the reasons as outlined in section 7 and conclusions in this report, and therefore the recommendation is one of approval subject to a section 106 agreement in relation to the affordable housing provision, open space provision and its management, and the conditions as set out in Appendix 1 attached to the report, and any amendments to these conditions if considered necessary by the Planning Services Manager. That concludes my presentation on this application, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Phew, thank you, Philip. Okay. Does the planning officer wish to decline? No, sorry. Can the sister read out any speaker statements, please?
There are no speaker statements on this item, Chair.
Thank you. I know that I was about to jump over that, but I got to ask the question. Read it. Does the planning officer wish to clarify any points in response? There was no points, so there won't be any response. So that case, members of the committee, can you now comment, please? And we'll take it from there.
Councillor Dakin has requested to.
Thank you, Councillor Dakin.
Thank you, Chairman. I read this report on Sunday. It took me 4 hours and I found it very, very negative. I can understand why it has been so long before it's been developed. I know it's required development probably for the last 15 years, probably longer. And I'm very pleased to see it's moving on, because it's exactly the kind of houses we want to see in this kind of location. I wished I'd read the planning officer's report first, because he'd obviously got great to grips with it, and I could understand it much better then. It would have saved me a lot of time had I read the planning officer's report. I think it's a very good report. I think it's much more simple to understand now. And I'd like to say that I like this. I like this development very much indeed, and it's very much needed.
Thank you, Councillor Dakin.
I haven't got any other indications just yet, Chair.
Okay. Hopefully it's a bit simpler than the last few, which I think it will be. Right. If there's nobody else going to speak, I'm going to put a proposal forward. I'd like to go with the officer's recommendation.
Second that.
Okay. Do we have any other speakers?
No, Chair.
Okay. In that case, we'll go straight to the vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The recommendation is one of approval. It's been proposed and seconded, and I will ask you in turn if you are for or against. Councillor Aldcroft.
For.
Councillor Bardsley.
For.
Councillor Dakin.
For.
Councillor Dean.
For.
Councillor Green.
For.
Councillor Hunt.
For.
Councillor Jones is sitting out this one, so Councillor Mosley.
For.
Councillor Roberts.
For.
Councillor Wynne.
For.
Councillor Vasmer.
For.
Aside from the one member sitting out, Chair, that's unanimous out of the vote, therefore that is carried. May I just mention one thing? At the beginning of the meeting, I noted down that Councillor Jones said he would sit out of an item because he did an interest, but I think he said 8, I wrote down. Well, actually, I think he meant 9, which is in fact this one. So just to clarify that, I'm sure he'll perhaps confirm that I'm correct in that, just so that we're clear.
Thank you very much. It was 9, and I think he's left the meeting anyway, actually. Okay. Right. Okay, so just to clarify, that has been passed going with the officer's recommendation unanimously. So, right, we'll go to the next item, which is item 10, appeals and appeal decisions. Do we have any comments on that?
As far as officers are concerned, Mr. Chair, I have no comment to make, only noted.
Okay, thank you. Kelvin, do you have any comments?
No, nothing from me, thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Right, do any members wish to comment on the appeals? Otherwise, we can note them.
Yeah.
Move we note, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I'll second that. Date of the next meeting. To note, the next meeting of the Northern Planning Committee will be held at 2 p.m. on Tuesday, the 9th of March. That concludes the agenda. I will now close the meeting and ask the committee officer to end the live event.